I woke up in a Maryland hospital recovery room to the sound of my phone buzzing on a metal tray. Still tasting the bitter chemical tang of anesthesia, I managed to lift my head. A hot, tearing sensation bloomed across my abdomen, a sharp reminder of the emergency gallbladder extraction I had undergone hours earlier. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the sting of the surgical staples, and extended a heavy arm toward the tray. The screen illuminated with a Zillow property alert for my own zip code. I squinted at the bright light. My 4-bedroom colonial in Annapolis was listed as active, accepting offers. The photos were crisp and professional. They were taken yesterday. I knew this because my vintage leather sofa in the living room was now decorated with 3 embroidered floral pillows. My mother-in-law Beverly owned those pillows. She kept them in the sunroom of her estate, treating them like royal crests. While I was bleeding through surgical gauze, my husband and his mother had put my premarital home on the market. Before I explain how I legally dismantled their lives, welcome to Linda Vengeance. Please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know your age and where you are listening from today. I stared at the listing agent profile. Richard Sterling, a luxury broker notorious in the local real estate circuit for 10-day cash closings and waiving inspections. My heart monitor registered a steady, rhythmic beep. It did not spike. I did not press the nurse call button. I did not dial my husband Derek to demand an explanation. As a forensic auditor, I spent my days tracking hidden assets and identifying the exact moment a white-collar crime transitioned from a thought to an executed reality. I recognized a coordinated asset seizure when I saw one. I was physically immobilized. I was tethered to an IV pole dispensing pain medication, unable to put on my shoes or walk out the door. The people who smiled in my wedding photos were currently auctioning off my sanctuary. I set the phone face down on the thin hospital blanket. The heavy wooden door swung open. Beverly walked in. The scent of her expensive jasmine perfume immediately clashed with the sterile smell of hospital antiseptic. Her heels clicked a sharp, measured rhythm against the linoleum floor. She wore a pristine beige cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, projecting a facade of wealth that I knew, from her tax returns, was entirely hollow. She did not bring flowers. She did not bring a get well card. She carried a folded cardboard moving box under one arm and a clipboard in her hand. Beverly did not approach the bed to hold my hand or ask about my incisions. She stood near the footboard, inspecting me like a depreciating asset on a balance sheet. She dropped the flattened box. It landed with a dull thud against my feet. "Louise, dear, you look exhausted," Beverly said. Her tone was sweet, the kind of sweet that coats a bitter pill. "The surgeon said the procedure was complicated. You will need weeks of rest. Navigating those steep stairs at your house is simply out of the question." I swallowed dry air. Every breath pulled at my stitches. "The stairs are fine, Beverly," she offered a tight, practiced smile. "Derek and I had a long talk while you were in the operating room. We took a family vote. A multi-story home is too demanding for a woman in your fragile condition. I brought Richard through the property yesterday afternoon. He agrees with us. We signed the listing agreement this morning." I felt the cold air of the room seep into my bones. "You listed my house while I was unconscious." "For the family," she corrected smoothly. "We have already accepted a cash offer over the asking price. The buyer wants a rapid closing. It is a blessing. You will not have to worry about the upkeep anymore. Derek is already looking into a quiet, single-level apartment for the two of you." She pulled a piece of paper from her clipboard. It was a standard hospital release form, but she handled it like a confession document. She reached into her designer purse and withdrew a cheap blue friction ink pen. She extended it toward me, her manicured fingers tapping the plastic barrel. "Sign this for the nurses," Beverly said. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, calculating my reaction. "I know how much you need to control the paperwork, Louise, but you are too weak now. You need to let the family handle the heavy lifting. If you fight us on this, the doctors might think the surgery affected your cognitive reasoning." I looked at the blue pen. I looked at the woman who had spent the last 3 years treating my savings account like a community chest. I understood the threat hiding behind her polite words. If I caused a scene, I would be labeled the hysterical, ungrateful wife resisting her family's care. I took the pen. My fingers trembled not from fear, but from the raw effort of suppressing a smile. I signed the medical release in a slow, deliberate script. The cheap blue ink bled slightly onto the page. Beverly snatched the clipboard back, satisfied with my apparent surrender. Derek will be here in a few hours. Please do not make a fuss and upset him. He is under enough stress coordinating the movers. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the empty moving box resting against my blanket. A physical threat disguised as a favor. The room fell silent again. I picked up my phone. I did not open my messages to confront my husband. I opened my encrypted cloud drive. I typed in a 12-character password and scrolled past my corporate audits. I tapped a folder labeled Clio Independence Trust. 7 months ago, I caught Derek lying about a business loan he took out to cover Beverly's country club dues. That same afternoon, I sat in my estate attorney's office and executed an irrevocable living trust. I transferred the deed of the Annapolis house out of my personal name and into the trust, naming myself as the sole trustee. By doing this, I stripped myself of personal ownership on paper. I stared at the digitized county clerk registry on my screen. The watermarked document proved my safety. Beverly and Derek were rushing to sell a house that Louis Clio, the individual, no longer owned. They were sprinting toward federal wire fraud. I rested my head against the stiff pillow, letting the medication dull the pain in my stomach. I was going to let them cross the finish line. Beverly stepped out of the sterile hospital room and let the heavy wooden door click shut behind her. She did not look back through the narrow glass window. Her beige cashmere sweater felt stifling in the climate-controlled corridor, but she maintained her perfect posture. Her heels struck the polished linoleum in a sharp, measured cadence. She had done it. She had planted the seed of compliance, leaving that ridiculous cardboard moving box at the foot of the bed. She reached into her designer handbag and retrieved the cheap blue friction ink pen. She stared at the plastic barrel. It was a petty gesture, taking a pen from a local bank teller just to hand it to Louise, but it served a distinct purpose. It reminded Louise of her place. Louise always needed to control every document, every spreadsheet, every financial decision in their marriage. Handing her that inferior pen to sign a meaningless medical form was a physical assertion of dominance. Louise had taken it. Her hands had trembled. Beverly interpreted that tremor as a fracture in her daughter-in-law's usual icy armor. The elevator doors parted. Beverly stepped inside, grateful for the empty cab. The moment the doors slid closed, her elegant facade dropped. Her shoulders sagged. She leaned against the metal railing and pulled her phone from her purse. She opened her banking application, her thumb hovering over the screen before tapping the authentication prompt. The numbers loaded. A stark, red minus sign glared back at her. Negative $4,000 in her primary checking account. Her credit utilization hovered near the maximum limit across 3 different platinum cards. Tomorrow, the Annapolis Yacht Club would process their quarterly membership dues. If that transaction bounced, the billing committee would send a notice. In her social circle, a declined payment was a terminal diagnosis. Her friends did not forgive poverty. They shunned it like a contagious disease. Beverly locked the screen and shoved the phone away. She was not stealing Louise's home. She framed the real estate transaction as a necessary family restructuring. Louise was an outsider, a woman who brought spreadsheets and forensic audits to a family built on pedigree. When Beverly's late husband passed away, he left behind a prestigious surname and a mountain of hidden liabilities. Beverly had spent the last decade shifting funds, borrowing against future promises, and maintaining the illusion of grand generational wealth. Liquidating the Maryland Colonial was simply a recalibration of assets. Derek deserved a life free from financial anxiety, and Louise owed them for the privilege of carrying their name. The elevator chimed, depositing her into the bustling main lobby. The scent of roasted coffee beans from the cafeteria provided a welcome relief from the clinical odors upstairs. She spotted Richard Sterling waiting near the revolving doors. The luxury real estate broker wore a bespoke navy suit that draped perfectly across his shoulders. He was tapping a platinum watch against his wrist, projecting an aura of perpetual impatience. Richard specialized in moving high-value properties fast, asking few questions as long as his commission cleared. Beverly adjusted her expression, summoning her signature country club charm. She approached him with an extended hand. Richard took it, offering a brief nod. "How is our patient holding up today?" "She is resting," Beverly replied, keeping her tone light and unconcerned. "The surgery was successful, but the recovery will be demanding. Navigating a 2-story colonial is out of the question for the foreseeable future. I explained the situation to her. She understands the necessity of the sale." Richard raised a single manicured eyebrow. He knew the truth. He knew a wife recovering from an organ extraction rarely consented to selling her premarital asset in a 10-day window. But Richard operated on percentages, not morals. "Did you secure her signature on the preliminary disclosures?" "I laid the groundwork," Beverly said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her slacks. "My son is arriving shortly to manage the final paperwork. Derek handles the administrative details for his wife. We will have the documents to your office before the end of the business day." "The buyer is eager," Richard warned. He lowered his voice, stepping closer to avoid the flow of foot traffic. "This developer does not wait. He has cash in hand and is willing to waive the inspection, but he wants the keys by next Friday. If we delay, he walks. I have a backup offer, but it is $50,000 lower. We need to close this loop." "Do not threaten me with backup offers, Richard." Beverly maintained a pleasant smile, though her eyes hardened. "You will have your signed disclosures. Just ensure the closing documents are prepped. I want the wire transfer executed the moment the ink dries." Richard offered a tight, predatory grin. "A pleasure doing business with you, Beverly." He turned and exited through the revolving doors. Beverly watched him walk toward a sleek black sports car idling at the curb. She needed a moment to breathe. She navigated toward a quiet alcove near the gift shop and dialed her daughter's number. Vanessa answered on the first ring. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the high ceilings of whatever failing boutique she was currently trying to salvage. "Did she agree? Did you get the house listed?" Beverly pinched the bridge of her nose. "Lower your voice, Vanessa." "Yes, the property is listed. We already have an all-cash buyer lined up. Richard is drafting the final settlement statement." "I need $150,000 by Thursday, Mom." Vanessa sounded frantic. "The payroll checks bounced this morning. My suppliers are threatening to halt all shipments. If I do not wire them funds, they are going to lock the doors on my store. I cannot go to jail for fraud." "You are not going to jail," Beverly hissed, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "I told you I would fix this, and I am fixing it. The sale will generate more than enough equity to cover your operational deficits and secure a comfortable rental for your brother. You just need to hold your creditors off for a few more days. Tell them a family trust is releasing funds. It is not a trust, Mom. It is a stolen house. It is family restructuring." Beverly corrected her tone, turning to ice. "I will not tolerate that kind of language. We are protecting Derek's future. Louise is a high-earning professional. She will recover her financial footing quickly. We do not have that luxury. You will get your money. Just stay quiet and do not interfere with my timeline." Beverly terminated the call before Vanessa could protest further. The interaction left her drained. She despised weakness, especially in her own children. She had spent her entire life orchestrating their survival, moving pieces on a chessboard they could barely comprehend. She walked outside into the humid Maryland afternoon. The heat immediately clamped down on her chest. She stood near the patient loading zone, watching the stream of vehicles circle the entrance. A silver sedan pulled into the drop-off lane. Derek stepped out of the driver's side. He wore a heavy designer wool coat despite the stifling weather. Dark circles framed his eyes, and a sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He looked less like a corporate manager and more like a man walking toward a firing squad. Beverly intercepted him before he could reach the automatic doors. She grabbed his arm, steering him away from a group of smoking nurses. Derek flinched. "Is she awake? Did you talk to her?" "I managed the initial contact," Beverly said, keeping her grip firm on his sleeve. "She is groggy. The medication is keeping her docile." "I laid out the necessity of the sale, and I left the moving box in plain sight. She knows it is happening. She didn't fight you on it." Derek wiped his brow with the back of his hand. Louise never agrees to anything without reviewing a spreadsheet first. She is in no position to argue, Beverly said, studying her son's pale complexion. You need to go up there and maintain the narrative. Do not let her ask questions. Remind her that fighting this will cause marital strife she cannot afford right now. Tell her you are doing this to secure a safer living arrangement for her recovery. Derek swallowed hard, looking toward the hospital entrance. I don't know if I can do this, Mom. If she finds out the real reason we need this money closed so fast... She will not find out, Beverly interrupted, her voice slicing through his panic. You will go to her room. You will hold her hand. You will play the concerned, overwhelmed husband trying to keep the peace. You will secure her consent for Richard's paperwork. If you fail, your sister loses her business, and those men you owe money to will not care about your excuses. Derek squeezed his eyes shut, nodding slowly. Keep the peace. I just need to keep the peace. Exactly, Beverly said, releasing his arm and smoothing the lapel of his heavy coat. You are protecting this family. Now go upstairs and do your job. She watched her son walk through the sliding glass doors, his posture hunched, carrying the weight of their collective sins into the sterile corridors. Beverly turned toward the parking garage, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips. The pieces were all in motion. The house would close, the debts would vanish, and Louis would simply have to adapt to her new reality. Beverly unlocked her luxury SUV, confident that she had successfully orchestrated the perfect transaction. She had no idea she was driving straight into an ironclad trap. Derek walked down the third-floor corridor of the surgical ward, each step feeling heavier than the last. His charcoal wool coat acted as a stifling weighted blanket, trapping his body heat against his damp skin. He reached up and adjusted his silk tie, pulling the knot away from his throat to allow a fraction of airflow. A bead of sweat traced a slow, agonizing path down his spine. The climate control in the Annapolis Medical Center was set to a brisk, sterile temperature, yet Derek felt as though he were navigating a blast furnace. He kept the coat securely buttoned. Taking the garment off meant exposing the dark, spreading perspiration stains blooming beneath his arms. He needed the heavy fabric as a physical shield against the reality of his situation. At 36 years old, Derek had built a lucrative career in regional logistics by mastering the art of the facade. He wore tailored suits, played 18 holes at prestigious country clubs, and offered bright, confident smiles during board meetings. He survived on charm and the protective shadow cast by his domineering mother. But charm could not mask the visceral, agonizing panic vibrating through his nervous system this afternoon. Facing his wife required a spine he simply did not possess. He paused outside room 312. Through the narrow, rectangular glass panel in the door, he studied his wife. Louise looked small in the elevated hospital bed, her dark hair stark against the white pillowcase. A translucent IV line trailed from the back of her bruised hand, delivering clear fluid, drop by methodical drop. At the foot of the mattress rested the folded cardboard box his mother had dropped off earlier. Derek swallowed a hard knot of dread. He turned the metal handle and pushed the door open. Louise slowly turned her head. Her dark eyes were sharp, evaluating his entrance with the exact clinical precision she utilized when auditing fraudulent corporate ledgers. She did not look like a woman subdued by post-operative narcotics. She looked like a predator assessing a wounded animal. Derek approached the bedside, his expensive leather shoes squeaking softly against the polished linoleum floor. He forced a sympathetic, practiced smile, the specific expression he reserved for high-value clients experiencing unexpected shipping delays. "Hey there," he murmured, maintaining a safe physical distance from the railing. "How is the pain level today?" Louise ignored the pleasantry. She stared directly at his heavy winter outerwear. "Why are you wearing a wool coat indoors?" Derek shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, burying his trembling hands deep into his coat pockets. "It is freezing in this building. The maintenance staff always cranks the air conditioning too high." A fresh drop of sweat fell from his temple, landing squarely on the crisp white collar of his dress shirt. Louise tracked the droplet's downward path without blinking. She remained entirely silent, forcing him to fill the uncomfortable void. This was a classic interrogation tactic she often deployed, letting the quiet stretch until the opposing party cracked under the pressure of their own guilt. Derek cleared his throat, leaning his hip against the sterile laminate counter. Mom mentioned she stopped by earlier. She said you two shared a productive conversation about our next steps. She brought a moving box, Louise replied, her voice raspy from the intubation tube, but remarkably steady. And she informed me that my house is currently listed for sale on the open market. Derek flinched at her phrasing. He despised it when Louise referred to the property as her house. Even though she had purchased the real estate with her own generated savings long before their wedding day, her insistence on maintaining financial autonomy always made him feel inadequate. He rallied his courage, recalling the specific script his mother had drilled into his head in the hospital parking garage. "It is a family restructuring, Louise. We are organizing this transition for you." "For me?" "Yes." Derek nodded, rapidly warming up to the rehearsed deception. "The attending surgeon warned us about your extensive recovery period. Navigating a 2-story colonial with steep wooden stairs is dangerous right now." We took a vote. We decided it was best to liquidate the asset while the housing market remains hot, so you do not have to stress about the landscaping or the general upkeep. Richard Sterling already located an eager buyer. Louise blinked at a slow, deliberate pace. "You and your mother took a vote on selling a property that belongs to me, while I was under general anesthesia on an operating table." Derek stepped closer to the mattress, dropping his voice into a soft, pleading register. "Please do not turn this into a battle. I am under immense stress at the logistics firm, and seeing you injured in this hospital bed is tearing me apart. We just want to ensure you have a safe, single-level environment to heal properly. You need to keep the peace, Louis. If you fight this transition, you will only delay your own physical healing. Just trust my judgment." The phrase hung in the stagnant air between them. Keep the peace. It was the blunt instrument he wielded whenever her flawless logic cornered his glaring incompetence. Louise adjusted the thin thermal blanket with her free hand. "If we sell the Colonial in 10 days, where exactly are we supposed to live?" Derek looked away, fixing his evasive gaze on the rhythmic green line of the heart monitor. "We will secure a suitable rental property, a single-level place, something highly manageable." He lied effortlessly. He already knew the exact address of his new residence. 2 days prior, Derek had signed a binding lease on a luxury penthouse downtown, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows and a dedicated private concierge service. He had already transported his custom golf clubs and Italian suits into the master walk-in closet. Securing that premium lease had been a logistical nightmare. His personal credit score was currently in ruins, decimated by a string of offshore financial obligations he kept expertly hidden from his social circle, and most importantly, from his forensic auditor wife. To bypass the rigorous background check, Derek had orchestrated the rental agreement under the corporate umbrella of Vanessa's boutique holding company. His younger sister's limited liability corporation provided the necessary corporate veil to satisfy the strict leasing agent. By entangling his luxury housing with Vanessa's failing retail business, Derek had legally intertwined their mutual ruin. If the Colonial did not sell in time to cover his offshore debts and her bouncing payroll checks, the penthouse lease would immediately default. The boutique would face aggressive receivership, and the men he owed money to would stop sending polite, coded text messages. The 10-day closing window Richard Sterling promised was not an aggressive real estate strategy. It was a terrifying survival countdown. Louise continued to watch him from the bed. Her silence felt suffocating pressing against his chest. She noted the dampness of his collar, the frantic twitch in his jawline, and his persistent refusal to make direct eye contact. She asked no further questions about the vague rental plans or the eager real estate agent. "Okay," Louise whispered. Derek exhaled a long, shaky breath, the tension leaving his rigid shoulders in a sudden rush. He believed he had won the skirmish. He genuinely believed his docile, compliant wife had accepted the inevitable outcome of the sale. He walked to the side of the hospital bed and leaned his torso over the metal safety railing. "Thank you," he said, his voice dripping with forced sincerity. I promise this is the right move for our shared future. He pressed his lips to her pale forehead. Her skin felt unnervingly cold against his mouth. It was a Judas kiss. Sealing a profound betrayal, he lacked the basic courage to confess out loud. As Derek pulled back and straightened his posture, he missed the subtle tectonic transformation shifting in her expression. The fragile vulnerability of a recovering surgical patient vanished. The residual warmth of a trusting spouse evaporated into the clinical air. In that brief, pathetic interaction, observing his undeniable cowardice and the panicked sweat staining his expensive shirt, Luis severed the final emotional thread tethering her to their failing marriage. She stopped viewing him as a struggling partner in need of saving or support. She now analyzed him as a hostile liability that needed to be neutralized. Derek patted her shoulder, eager to escape the clinical scrutiny of her dark eyes. I need to meet with Richard at his brokerage office to review the preliminary seller disclosures. Get some rest. I will handle the administrative details. He turned and fled the room, his leather shoes squeaking rapidly down the polished hallway. He left the heavy wooden door slightly ajar, desperate to reach the elevators and inhale fresh oxygen. Louise lay alone in the quiet room, her eyes fixed on the textured ceiling tiles. Her own husband had just proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he was the enemy's primary asset. She closed her eyes, no longer feeling the sharp sting of the surgical staples holding her abdomen together. Her sharp mind shifted gears, permanently abandoning grief and fully embracing ruthless strategy. She began calculating the exact hour she would let the ambitious title company discover the buried truth. The rules of engagement had changed, and Derek had just foolishly handed her the opening move. The door clicked shut, trapping the stale hospital air inside the recovery room. Louise stared at the empty space where her husband had just stood. The silence felt heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor. She glanced down at her wrist. The translucent IV tubing anchored her to the medical pole, delivering a steady drip of saline and painkillers into her veins. Her physical confinement was complete, but her digital reach remained unobstructed. She reached across the sterile bedside table and grabbed her tablet. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across her tired face. Her fingers, though slightly trembling from the surgical trauma, tapped the security application icon with practiced precision. The loading wheel spun for a fraction of a second before the dashboard populated. 6 high-definition camera feeds materialized on the screen, offering a comprehensive view of her Annapolis property. The top left quadrant displayed the front lawn. Louise stopped breathing. 4 unknown vehicles were parked haphazardly along her manicured curb. A silver Lexus blocked the driveway entrance. Strangers in casual weekend attire wandered up her brick walkway, pointing at the restored architectural details of the facade. It was not just a preliminary listing. It was an active, unregulated open house. Louise zoomed in on the front yard feed. Richard Sterling stood near the meticulously trimmed rose bushes. The real estate broker had removed his bespoke suit jacket, revealing pristine white shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He hoisted a heavy wooden post over his shoulder. With deliberate, practiced strikes of a mallet, he drove the sharp metal stake deep into her perfectly aerated turf. He hung a polished wooden sign from the crossbar. Even through the digital distortion, the bold red letters burned into Luis's retinas. Pending. The broker was not merely showing the property. He was locking down the transaction, accelerating the timeline to satisfy the impatient cash buyer his mother-in-law had bragged about. The audacity of the visual struck Louise like a physical blow. They were sealing her fate in broad daylight, relying on her physical absence and assumed compliance. Louis tapped the bottom right quadrant, switching the feed to the interior foyer camera. The heavy oak front door stood wide open, welcoming the humid afternoon breeze. A sharp staccato clicking sound transmitted through the tablet speaker. Vanessa Derek's younger sister marched into the frame. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit and carried a designer leather tote bag hooked over her forearm. Vanessa had spent her entire adult life launching boutique retail concepts funded entirely by other people's capital. She consistently drove those ventures into quiet bankruptcy while maintaining a curated social media aesthetic of relentless success. Luis watched the screen as Vanessa stepped off the hardwood floor and directly onto the antique Persian rug Luis had sourced from an estate auction 3 years prior. Vanessa wore tall, suede designer boots. The soles were caked in fresh, dark mud from the recent spring rain. She paced across the intricate woven fibers, leaving a trail of jagged brown footprints on the vintage silk. Vanessa was not simply visiting. She was acting as the primary host. She waved a pair of older, affluent-looking clients through the entryway, gesturing broadly toward the vaulted ceilings and the customized crown molding. The strangers touched the banister. They trailed their hands along the custom wainscoting. They were evaluating Luis's refuge, quantifying her sanctuary into a price per square foot. The violation escalated as the group moved out of the foyer. Luis toggled the application following their path through the house, clicking onto the master bedroom feed. Vanessa led the couple into Luis's private sleeping quarters. The sister-in-law opened the custom cedar closet doors, showcasing the extensive storage space. The tablet captured the ambient audio perfectly. "The layout is exquisite," the prospective female buyer remarked, running a hand over Luis's hanging silk blouses. The current owner clearly invested significant capital into these upgrades. Why sell so abruptly? Vanessa offered a bright, artificial laugh. "The family dynamics are shifting. My sister-in-law experienced a health crisis, and we are moving her to a more manageable facility. Besides, we decided it was time to cash out the equity. I have a rapidly expanding retail business downtown, and my mother agreed the surplus funds from this closing are going straight into my commercial expansion budget. It is a win for everyone." Luis listened to the casual confession. The dramatic irony tasted sharp on her tongue. Vanessa stood in a stolen bedroom, loudly boasting to total strangers about leveraging a fraudulent real estate transaction to rescue her failing storefront. The sister-in-law was completely unaware that the actual homeowner was watching her in high definition. She was spending phantom money. She was counting equity that belonged to an irrevocable trust she did not even know existed. Luis did not throw the tablet. She did not cry. She pressed the volume button and took a screenshot. The shutter clicked silently. She captured the muddy footprints on the rug. She captured the strangers touching her garments. She recorded the audio clip of Vanessa detailing the financial motive behind the theft. Each digital file became a pristine, time-stamped piece of forensic evidence. The urge to call the local police precinct and report a home invasion flared hot in her chest. She could easily dispatch patrol cars to the property, humiliating Vanessa in front of the affluent buyers and Richard Sterling. But halting the open house today would only result in a misdemeanor trespassing charge. Her in-laws would simply regroup, invent a plausible misunderstanding, and attack her from a different angle. Luis understood the mechanics of retaliation. You do not punish a parasite by simply swatting it away. You allow the parasite to consume the poison. She minimized the security application and opened her encrypted email client. She initiated a new draft addressing the message to her lead estate attorney, a ruthless litigator who specialized in complex asset protection. She attached the time-stamped screenshots, the audio files, and a specific set of concise instructions. Do not intervene immediately. Monitor the county clerk registry. Wait for the buyer's title company to formally request the deed clearance. Let them initiate the final wire transfer protocols. She did not press send. Instead, she opened the delivery options and selected the scheduled dispatch feature. She set the digital timer for exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning. By the time her attorney read the file, Richard Sterling would have already submitted the forged preliminary disclosures to the escrow officers. The family would be locked into the transaction. Luis placed the tablet back onto the metal bedside tray. Her pulse was remarkably steady. She closed her eyes and let the rhythmic hum of the medical machinery lull her into a deep, calculating sleep. She had just given her husband and his desperate relatives enough rope to weave their own noose. They thought they were selling a house. In reality, they were drafting their own federal indictments. The hum of the intravenous pump beside the hospital bed faded into the background. Louise closed her eyes, letting the rhythmic, mechanical sound transport her away from the sterile recovery room. The noise morphed into a different frequency. It became the low, steady vibration of her desktop computer cooling fan from 7 months ago. It was a rainy Tuesday night in late November. The Maryland autumn chill had settled over the Annapolis Colonial. Louise sat in her home office, illuminated only by the stark glare of dual monitors. She was conducting a routine reconciliation of their annual household tax documents. Derek had gone to sleep hours earlier, claiming exhaustion from a grueling quarter at his logistics firm. As a forensic auditor, Louise possessed a unique talent for spotting anomalies in vast oceans of data. Her eyes scanned the digital ledgers, moving past standard mortgage payments and utility deductions. She stopped at a localized credit inquiry. It was a secondary commercial line of credit originated under Derek's electronic signature. The principal balance was $50,000. The attached memo line categorized the withdrawal as an emergency corporate bridge loan to cover supply chain disruptions. Louise did not wake him. She did not march into the master bedroom to demand an explanation from her sleeping husband. She simply opened a new encrypted tab and followed the digital breadcrumbs. She traced the routing number associated with the disbursement. The funds never touched a corporate logistics account. The money bypassed Derek's business entirely, funneling directly into a private wealth management tier at a regional bank. Louise cross-referenced the destination account digits against her archived financial records. It was a precise match. The receiving account belonged to Beverly. Derek had quietly mortgaged their shared financial stability to plug the gaping holes in his mother's sinking luxury lifestyle. The $50,000 likely covered Beverly's overdue yacht club membership arrears and provided a fresh infusion of cash for Vanessa's latest doomed retail venture. Sitting in the dark office, Louise experienced a profound shift in her reality. Her heart did not race. Her hands did not tremble. A cold, clinical clarity washed over her. She recognized the symptom of a terminal marriage. Derek was actively siphoning their resources, prioritizing his mother's fragile social standing over his own wife's security. 3 days later, Louise took a scheduled afternoon of paid time off. She drove to a high-rise building in downtown Baltimore, parking her sedan in the underground garage. She rode the elevator to the 40th floor, stepping into the mahogany-paneled reception area of her estate attorney. Marcus Thorne was a ruthless litigator who specialized in complex asset shielding for high-net-worth clients. He did not ask emotional questions. He provided tactical solutions. Louise sat in a leather chair across from his polished desk. She handed in the warranty deed to her Annapolis Colonial. She articulated her goal with concise, unwavering precision. She needed to sever her personal ownership of the property without relinquishing operational control. Marcus drafted the necessary paperwork within the hour. Louise reviewed the documents, her fingers brushing against the heavy textured parchment. The tactile sensation of the thick paper grounded her. She read the clauses defining the irrevocable living trust. She named the entity the Clio Independence Trust. By signing the transfer documentation, Louise legally conveyed the real estate out of her individual name. She stripped herself of personal ownership on paper. The house became an autonomous entity, legally insulated from marital claims, sudden divorce settlements, or unexpected spousal debts. Louise appointed herself as the sole trustee. She retained absolute authority to manage, reside in, or modify the property. But on the official county registry, Louise, the wife, owned nothing. A notary public entered the office. The woman stamped the heavy parchment, the metal seal clamped down, embossing a raised circular watermark onto the signature page. That tactile watermark represented a fortress Derek could never breach. The sharp sting of her surgical incision snapped Louise back to the present. She opened her eyes, staring at the acoustic ceiling tiles of the hospital recovery ward. The memory of that notarized watermark filled her with a quiet, powerful satisfaction. She picked up her tablet from the metal tray, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her staples. She opened the web browser and navigated to the official Maryland County Clerk portal. The digital interface was clunky, designed for municipal clerks rather than standard consumers. Louise bypassed the basic search functions and entered her specific property identification number into the advanced query bar. The database loaded the public record. Louise focused on the current owner of record field. It did not say Derek Cleo. It did not say Louise Cleo. The digital text proudly displayed Cleo Independence Trust. The sheer beauty of the legal landmine she had planted 7 months ago crystallized in her mind. Her mother-in-law had orchestrated a hostile takeover. Her sister-in-law was currently tracking mud across the Persian rug, hosting an unapproved open house. Her husband was negotiating real estate commissions with a luxury broker. They were eagerly selling a piece of real estate that technically belonged to a phantom. Richard Sterling could hammer as many wooden signs into the pristine turf as he desired. The eager cash buyer could schedule his moving trucks and pick out fresh paint colors. The family could mentally spend the anticipated equity. But the moment the escrow officer pulled the official title commitment, the entire fraudulent transaction would crash into an immovable bureaucratic wall. Louise locked the tablet screen. The soft blue glow vanished, plunging the hospital bed back into shadows. Her strategic maneuver was flawless, but it introduced a dangerous new variable. Richard Sterling was a seasoned professional. He handled dozens of high-value transactions every quarter. Eventually, his transaction coordinator would spot the trust designation on the preliminary title search. When that inevitable discovery occurred, the broker would inform Beverly and Derek that a standard signature was insufficient. To legally authorize the transfer of a deed held in a trust, the title company required the verified signature of the named trustee. They needed her consent. Louise processed this new reality. Beverly had promised an eager developer a 10-day cash closing. That developer was expecting the keys by next Friday. The matriarch of the family despised delays and never accepted defeat. If Beverly learned that Louise controlled the only pen capable of releasing the property, the mother-in-law would not simply ask for a favor. The tension mounted in the quiet recovery room. Louise knew her in-laws were operating under severe financial distress. Desperate people rarely retreated when faced with a roadblock. They escalated. If Beverly could not secure a willing signature from a conscious, capable daughter-in-law, the older woman would seek an alternative route. Louise realized her physical vulnerability in the medical facility was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a tactical liability. Beverly had already hinted to the hospital staff that the surgery might have affected Louise's cognitive reasoning. The matriarch was laying the groundwork to bypass consent entirely. Louise stared at the locked door of her room, anticipating the moment her own medical chart would be weaponized against her. The battle was shifting from a digital real estate scam to a direct assault on her mental competency. Vanessa leaned against the cool marble island in the Annapolis kitchen. She ignored the older couple touring the adjacent dining room. Her manicured thumb swiped upward on her smartphone screen. She scrolled through a local dealership inventory of imported sports utility vehicles. A sleek matte black model with cream leather interior caught her eye. The sticker price read $90,000. Her checking account currently held $42.16. The disconnect between her curated social media presence and her actual bank balance formed a constant gnawing acid in her stomach. She owned a high-end retail storefront in an upscale shopping district. On social media platforms, she posted stylized photographs of imported silk scarves and artisanal ceramics. In reality, her suppliers had halted all shipments 3 weeks ago. Her payroll checks bounced that morning. If she did not deposit $150,000 into her commercial operating account by Thursday, her 3 employees would file formal labor complaints, and the commercial landlord would change the locks. Vanessa viewed her sister-in-law not as a human being recovering from a surgical extraction, but as a stubborn obstacle hoarding resources the family desperately required. Louise earned a substantial salary as a forensic auditor and parked it in retirement accounts and boring index funds. To Vanessa, hoarding liquidity while family members struggled represented a deep moral failing. The Maryland Colonial was an underutilized asset. Liquidating it to save the family name was the only logical solution. She opened her messaging application and tapped Richard Sterling's contact icon. Her fingers flew across the digital keyboard. Richard, the older couple from the Bethesda zip code, seems highly motivated. Do whatever it takes to secure their offer today. Tell them we will accept a lower purchase price if they waive the property inspection and guarantee a 10-day cash closing. We need the wire transfer cleared by next Friday. Do not let them stall. She hit send. The blue text bubble popped onto the screen. It formed a permanent digital record of her intent to accelerate the distribution of stolen equity. Her phone buzzed instantly. It was not a reply from the broker, but an incoming call from her mother. Vanessa stepped into the walk-in pantry, pulling the heavy wooden door shut to muffle her voice. "Did they make an offer?" Beverly demanded, bypassing any standard greeting. "They are measuring the dining room for a custom table right now," Vanessa whispered, leaning against a shelf lined with perfectly organized organic spices. "I just texted Richard to push for the waived inspection. We need this cash released by next week. My payroll bounced, Mom. I need the $150,000 transferred the moment escrow closes." A sharp intake of breath echoed through the receiver. "You need to lower your expectations, Vanessa. We have multiple obligations to satisfy." Derek secured a premium lease downtown to maintain his operational baseline. The deposit and first 6 months of rent require immediate capitalization. Furthermore, the country club is demanding my quarterly arrears. You will receive $75,000 to placate your vendors. The rest must be allocated strategically. Vanessa gripped the edge of the wooden shelf. Her shaped acrylic nail dug into the painted wood. $75,000 barely covers my back rent and the bounced payroll checks. It leaves me with zero operating capital to purchase seasonal inventory. You promised me the full amount. "I promised to save you from bankruptcy." Beverly corrected her tone, adopting that familiar cutting chill. "You mismanaged your retail venture. Do not penalize your brother for your poor merchandising choices. Derek is doing the heavy lifting at the hospital right now, keeping Luis sedated and compliant. He assumes the greatest risk. Therefore, his housing transition takes priority." His transition. Vanessa hissed, her voice rising despite the confined space. "He rented a penthouse using my corporate limited liability designation. If this closing stalls, his luxury lease defaults onto my ruined credit profile. We are sharing the risk. I am acting as the primary host for this open house, while Luis is bleeding out in a recovery ward. I am doing the manual labor here. I want my agreed-upon share. We will discuss the final distribution matrix once the wire clears," Beverly said smoothly, refusing to yield ground. "Do not contact Richard again. You sound desperate, and brokers smell desperation. Let him negotiate. Just ensure the property looks immaculate and secure the doors when the viewing window expires." The line went dead. Vanessa stared at the dark screen of her phone, her pulse hammering against her throat. The acid in her stomach churned. Her own mother was already rationing the phantom money. They were squabbling over the spoils of a heist that had not yet concluded. Vanessa pushed the pantry door open and marched back into the kitchen. The older couple had departed. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the central air conditioning unit. The viewing window had officially closed. She walked through the hallway, verifying the front door was locked. She needed to leave, to return to her dark boutique and ignore the frantic voicemails from her unpaid employees. But the argument with her mother festered in her mind. $75,000 was an insult. It was a temporary bandage on a mortal wound. She needed a contingency plan. Vanessa ascended the hardwood stairs, her muddy boots leaving faint residue on the pristine steps. She entered the master bedroom to turn off the staging lamps. The room smelled faintly of Luis, a subtle blend of crisp linen and expensive lavender lotion. It irritated Vanessa. Everything about Luis irritated her. The organized life felt like a personal critique of Vanessa's chaotic existence. She moved toward the bedside table to switch off the reading lamp. A small velvet jewelry box rested near the base of the light. Vanessa paused. She reached out and flipped the hinged lid open. Resting on a bed of black satin was a diamond tennis bracelet. It was a vintage piece featuring uniform, brilliant-cut stones set in platinum. Luis rarely wore it. She kept it hidden away, another hoarded asset, gathering dust while her family suffocated under mounting debts. Vanessa lifted the bracelet from the box. The metal felt cool and heavy against her skin. The diamonds caught the ambient light, refracting tiny prisms across the bedroom wall. She mentally appraised the piece. At a reputable wholesale jeweler, those stones would easily command $10,000 or $15,000 in untraceable cash. It was a fraction of her payroll deficit, but it was immediate liquid capital. She justified the action instantly. Luis owed her. Luis was costing them time and causing friction with Beverly. This bracelet was merely a small advance on her rightful inheritance, a convenience fee for hosting the open house and tracking mud into her own vehicle. Vanessa draped the platinum chain over her left wrist. She fumbled with the intricate safety clasp for a moment before it secured with a definitive metallic snap. The weight of the diamonds felt satisfying. It felt like a minor victory in a war she was rapidly losing. She snapped the empty velvet box shut and shoved it to the back of the nightstand drawer, burying it beneath a stack of boring financial magazines. Let Luis assume she misplaced it during the medical emergency. Vanessa smoothed her crimson blazer and walked out of the bedroom, the stolen diamonds glittering against her skin. She descended the stairs blind to the security cameras tracking her every movement. She was consumed by her own immediate survival, oblivious to the digital trap Luis had armed from a hospital bed. As she drove away from the Colonial, Vanessa's phone buzzed with another text from Beverly. The message contained only 3 words: "Doctor is hesitating." The minor dispute over equity division faded, replaced by a sudden, chilling realization. If the attending physician refused to declare Luis incompetent, the entire real estate transaction would require a conscious, willing signature. The family had bypassed Luis to list the house, but they needed her mind broken to finalize the sale. Beverly stood near the bustling nurses' station on the 3rd floor. The harsh fluorescent lighting cast unflattering shadows across the sterile white corridors. She held her smartphone in her manicured hand. A new message from Richard Sterling glared on the screen. The text was brief and devoid of his usual polished charm. The title company requires the seller's signature on the preliminary disclosures by tomorrow morning. Without that ink, the buyer pulls his earnest money. The 10-day timeline collapses. Beverly locked the screen and slid the device into her designer handbag. A cold knot formed in her stomach. Derek had failed. Her son had spent 20 minutes inside that recovery room and emerged empty-handed. He had mumbled something about Louis needing more time to process the transition before fleeing the hospital entirely. Time was a luxury their family no longer possessed. Vanessa needed payroll funds by Thursday. Derek needed his luxury lease secured. The offshore creditors were circling. Beverly smoothed the front of her cashmere sweater. She needed a signature. If Louis refused to provide it willingly, Beverly would simply bypass her consent altogether. She scanned the hallway and spotted Dr. Evans. He was a younger attending physician with a tired posture and a digital tablet tucked under his arm. Beverly had researched him earlier that morning. He was ambitious, overworked, and susceptible to the influence of wealthy local donors. She adjusted her posture, letting her shoulders slump just a fraction. She summoned a look of profound maternal distress. "Dr. Evans," she called out, keeping her voice low and fragile. The physician turned and offered a polite nod. "Mrs. Cleo, how can I help you this afternoon?" Beverly stepped closer, invading his personal space just enough to command his full attention. She lowered her gaze, projecting vulnerability. "It is about my daughter-in-law, Louise. I am deeply concerned about her cognitive state. Derek just left her room in tears. She is exhibiting severe paranoia. She accused us of plotting against her, of trying to steal her belongings while she was under anesthesia. It breaks my heart to see her mind so fractured." Dr. Evans frowned, tapping the screen of his tablet. Post-operative delirium is not uncommon, especially after emergency extractions involving heavy sedatives. It usually clears within a day or 2. "I fear it is more severe than temporary confusion," Beverly murmured. Her voice trembled perfectly on cue. "She is refusing to manage her basic personal affairs. We have critical financial deadlines approaching, matters she usually handles with ease. Her husband is paralyzed by her sudden hostility. Derek holds a comprehensive medical and financial proxy from a previous surgery 3 years ago. Given her current detachment from reality, we need to activate that proxy to protect her assets until she stabilizes. She offered him a gentle, imploring smile, a fake smile, hiding a devastating lie. She needed the physician to document Luis as mentally incapacitated. With that official medical declaration, Derek could present the old proxy to Richard Sterling, sign the real estate disclosures on her behalf, and push the sale through escrow without Luis ever touching a pen. The tension in the corridor thickened. Dr. Evans stared at his tablet. He scrolled through the surgical chart. He noted her stable vital signs and her standard medication dosages. Activating a legal proxy to override a conscious patient requires a formal declaration of temporary incompetence, Dr. Evans explained. His tone shifted from polite to clinical. I understand your family is under stress, but I cannot simply sign a form based on observed paranoia. The legal threshold is strict. I will document your concerns in her file immediately. However, to proceed with transferring her legal authority, I must order a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Beverly maintained her concerned expression, but a sharp spike of genuine panic pierced her chest. Yes, Dr. Evans continued, entirely oblivious to the trap he had just sprung. A board-certified psychiatrist will conduct a comprehensive interview. They will assess her orientation, her memory, and her reasoning skills. The consult usually takes 48 to 72 hours to schedule and complete. Once the specialist submits their findings, we can discuss activating the proxy. The sterile scent of bleach in the hallway suddenly felt suffocating. Beverly realized the catastrophic error in her strategy. A 72-hour delay would obliterate the 10-day closing window. Richard Sterling and his wealthy buyer would walk away. The entire house of cards would collapse before the weekend. Worse than the delay was the evaluation itself. A trained psychiatrist would walk into that recovery room and ask Luis questions. Luis would not rant or rave. Luis would calmly and analytically explain that her mother-in-law was orchestrating a fraudulent real estate transaction. The specialist would realize Luis was perfectly sane. The medical staff would alert the hospital social workers. The police might be called to investigate elder financial abuse or familial coercion. Beverly had attempted to weaponize the medical bureaucracy against her daughter-in-law, but the bureaucracy had backfired. She inhaled a slow, measured breath. She elegantly pivoted, retracting her claws before the physician could see them. "You know, doctor, perhaps I am overreacting," Beverly said. Her voice adopted a soothing, apologetic cadence. "Derek and I are just so exhausted. The stress of the surgery has made us jumpy." Luis has always been a fiercely independent woman. Forcing a psychiatrist on her might only aggravate her current distress. Let us wait. Cancel the consult. We will handle her affairs as a family and give her the peace she needs to rest. Dr. Evans looked relieved. He clearly did not want to navigate the administrative headache of a competency hearing. "I agree. Rest is the best medicine right now. Let me know if her symptoms escalate." Beverly thanked him and walked away. She maintained her measured, graceful stride until she reached the elevator bank. She pressed the descending button. Her jaw clenched so tightly, her teeth ached. The medical route was a dead end. She could not bypass Luis using hospital protocol. She needed a signature on those preliminary disclosures by tomorrow morning. She rode the elevator down to the parking garage. The concrete structure echoed with the sound of distant car alarms and squealing tires. Beverly located her luxury SUV and climbed into the driver's seat. The leather upholstery felt cold against her skin. She did not start the engine. She sat in the dim lighting, her mind racing through her dwindling options. Derek was too weak to force Luis to sign. Vanessa was a liability, currently playing real estate agent and demanding unreasonable shares of the phantom equity. Beverly was the only person capable of saving their family from absolute financial ruin. If she could not obtain a legitimate signature, and she could not legally incapacitate the owner, only one avenue remained. She opened the center console of her vehicle and retrieved a small, leather-bound address book. She flipped past the names of caterers, country club board members, and charity gala organizers. She stopped on a specific page. Gregory Vance. He was a fellow member of the Annapolis Yacht Club. He operated a small, struggling title insurance agency near the marina. More importantly, Gregory was a certified notary public. 5 years ago, Gregory had faced a discreet but scandalous embezzlement accusation within the club treasury. Beverly had used her influence on the ethics committee to bury the investigation, saving him from public disgrace and federal prison. Gregory owed her an unpayable debt. Beverly stared at his phone number. The implications of what she was about to do washed over her. Bullying a daughter-in-law was a domestic dispute. Orchestrating a deceptive home sale was unethical. But forging a legal document and stamping it with a fraudulent notary seal crossed a rigid, terrifying boundary. It was a severe, undeniable federal felony. If discovered, it carried a mandatory prison sentence. She thought about the negative balance in her checking account. She thought about her country club friends discovering her insolvency. The prospect of social exile terrified her, far more than the abstract threat of the American justice system. People with her pedigree did not go to prison. They paid fines. They leveraged connections. They survived. She reached for her smartphone and dialed Gregory. He answered on the second ring, his voice betraying a hint of nervous surprise. "Gregory, darling," Beverly purred, her tone dripping with manufactured warmth. "I need a small favor. Derek is managing a sudden real estate transaction for his wife. Luis is incapacitated in the hospital, entirely unable to hold a pen. We need a general power of attorney executed and stamped this evening so Derek can finalize the paperwork on her behalf tomorrow morning." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. Beverly could hear Gregory breathing. "Notarizing a document without the principal signer present is strictly against the law, Beverly. My commission could be revoked." "I understand the technicalities, Gregory," she replied, dropping the warmth. Her voice became a sharp, precise blade. "But family emergencies require flexibility. I need the stamped document tonight. I will drive to your office, have the paperwork ready. We would not want anyone digging into the club treasury archives, would we?" Another pause. "I will leave the back door unlocked," Gregory whispered. Beverly ended the call. She dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. She had done it. She had committed to the fraud. Derek would have the power of attorney by nightfall. He would present it to Richard Sterling in the morning. The closing would proceed without a single delay. She turned the ignition key. The powerful engine roared to life, filling the concrete garage with a low, aggressive hum. Beverly steered the heavy vehicle toward the exit ramp, accelerating into the fading Maryland sunlight. She felt a surge of triumphant adrenaline. She believed she had outsmarted the hospital bureaucracy and secured her family future. She remained blissfully unaware that her decision to forge that signature was the exact catalyst required to detonate the legal landmine Luis had buried 7 months ago. The trap was no longer just set. Beverly had just willingly stepped directly onto the trigger. The hospital ward settled into the quiet rhythm of the night shift. The bustling energy of doctors and visitors faded, replaced by the soft squeak of rubber-soled nursing shoes pacing the linoleum corridors. Luis adjusted the incline of her mattress using the plastic remote control clipped to the bed rail. The shift in posture caused a dull ache in her abdomen, but she ignored it. She retrieved her tablet from the bedside tray. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room, casting sharp shadows against the acoustic ceiling tiles. She had a puzzle to solve. As a forensic auditor, Luis operated on a fundamental principle. Haste is the loudest symptom of fraud. When legitimate corporations conduct business, they move with deliberate, measured steps. When criminals orchestrate a theft, they sprint. The timeline Richard Sterling and Beverly constructed defied standard real estate logic. Even in a seller-favored market, a 10-day cash closing was an extreme anomaly. Cash buyers possessed leverage and typically utilized that leverage to demand thorough property inspections and detailed appraisals. A buyer willing to waive all contingencies and demand the keys in less than 2 weeks was not looking for a home. They were demanding a specific, rapid transfer of assets. Beverly was undoubtedly greedy. Vanessa was undeniably desperate to save her failing boutique. But their motivations did not fully explain the breakneck velocity of this transaction. Socialites and failed retail owners operated on monthly billing cycles. The 10-day deadline felt different. It felt like a countdown. Louise needed to find the catalyst. She tapped the virtual private network icon on her tablet, establishing a secure, encrypted tunnel directly to the high-speed router located in her Annapolis Colonial. When she first configured their home network 3 years ago, she installed enterprise-grade security protocols. Derek had complained about the complicated passwords, but he lacked the technical literacy to understand she also enabled comprehensive data logging. Every device connected to their wireless network left a digital footprint. She bypassed the initial firewall and accessed the administrative dashboard. She filtered the traffic logs, isolating the specific Internet protocol address assigned to Derek's personal laptop. Her husband was a creature of careless habit. He relied on the same password sequence he created during his college fraternity days, appending a different number at the end whenever a system forced an update. Luis ran a basic decryption script against his synced cloud folders. The progress bar filled in a matter of seconds. The security barrier dissolved, granting her unfettered access to his personal directories. She scrolled past folders containing logistics reports, fantasy football drafts, and mundane email backups. She was searching for anomalies. A specific recurring data packet caught her attention. It was a digital receipt generated every Tuesday at 2 a.m. Luis opened the file pathway. It was an automated transaction routing through an offshore cryptocurrency exchange. Every week, exactly $4,000 vanished from a shell account Derek had opened under a limited liability company and converted into digital coins. $4,000 a week, $16,000 a month. Louise narrowed her eyes. This was the pebble that would trigger the avalanche. She traced the destination of the cryptocurrency. The digital wallet did not belong to a legitimate investment firm. It traced back to an unregistered server hosted in a jurisdiction notorious for shielding illicit gambling syndicates. She navigated back to his root directory, searching for the corresponding ledger. She found a hidden partition, masked as a system diagnostic folder. She executed a bypass command and opened the primary spreadsheet. The document loaded onto her tablet screen. Row after row of categorized wagers spanned across the digital grid. Basketball spreads, international soccer parlays, high-stakes underground poker buy-ins. Derek had not simply dabbled in a weekend hobby. He had cultivated a severe, chronic addiction to offshore sports betting. Luis highlighted the sum column at the bottom of the spreadsheet. The numerical value struck her with the force of a physical blow. $312,000. He owed more than $250,000 to a shadow syndicate. She stared at the glowing numbers. The puzzle pieces snapped into a terrifying, coherent picture. Derek was not merely a spineless husband capitulating to his mother's domineering personality. He was a desperate, trapped man fighting for his physical survival. Luis opened a synced folder containing screenshots of his encrypted messaging application. The communications were brief, vulgar, and menacing. The sender operated under a single initial. Time is running out, Derek. The principal balance is due. We do not extend credit to cowards. Friday is the deadline. If the wire does not clear, we will visit the logistics office. If you are not there, we will visit your mother at her country club. We will visit the surgical ward. We collect our debts. The messages clarified the true nature of the real estate transaction. The 10-day closing window was not a strategic choice. It was an ultimatum dictated by dangerous men. Derek had offered up his wife's sanctuary as collateral to appease loan sharks. He intended to strip the equity from her premarital asset, wire the funds to an offshore account, and save his own kneecaps from being shattered in a parking garage. He was willing to render his recovering wife homeless to erase his hidden sins. Louise felt a cold, dark stillness settle over her chest. The betrayal was so profound it transcended anger. Derek had kissed her forehead just hours ago, knowing he was trading her security to a criminal enterprise. Her mother-in-law and sister-in-law were merely greedy opportunists grabbing crumbs from the table. Her husband was the architect of her intended ruin. She did not shed a single tear. Tears were a biological response to grief, and Louise Cleo was no longer mourning her marriage. She was processing evidence. Her fingers flew across the virtual keyboard. She initiated a mass download sequence. She captured every spreadsheet, every encrypted threat, every routing number, and every digital receipt. She packaged the files into a compressed, encrypted archive. She did not save them to her local device. She uploaded the archive to 3 separate secure servers located in different geographical regions. She forwarded a dormant link to her estate attorney, ensuring the data would survive even if her tablet was destroyed. She now possessed the exact weapon required to dismantle Derek in a court of law. The divorce proceedings would not be a negotiation. They would be an execution. The gambling ledgers proved he dissipated marital assets and engaged in criminal enterprises. No judge in Maryland would grant him a single cent of alimony. The stakes of her counteroffensive had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer just protecting a piece of property from entitled relatives. She was navigating a collision course with an aggressive external deadline and a syndicate that utilized violence as a collection tactic. If Derek failed to produce the funds by Friday, the creditors would fulfill their promises. Louise realized the cash buyer, Richard Sterling, was so eager to satisfy, was likely not a legitimate Maryland developer. The buyer was almost certainly a corporate front for the syndicate itself. They were not waiting for a wire transfer. They were seizing the real estate directly to liquidate the debt. Louise disconnected from the virtual private network. She wiped the cache on her tablet, leaving zero trace of her digital intrusion. A notification chimed on her screen. It was an intercepted email synced from Derek's inbox. The sender was Richard Sterling. The subject line was marked urgent. Louise tapped the notification. The brief message loaded on the glowing display. Derek, we have a problem. I submitted the preliminary disclosures to escrow this afternoon. The title attorney ran the standard deed verification. They found a discrepancy on the county registry. The transaction is on hold. Call me the minute you read this. A slow, genuine smile touched the corners of Louise's mouth. The bureaucratic roadblock had arrived exactly on schedule. Her mother-in-law had forged a signature. Her husband had lied to a syndicate. Her sister-in-law had spent phantom equity. They were all sprinting toward a finish line, carrying stolen bags of cash. And the title company had just erected a concrete wall directly in their path. Louise plugged her tablet into the charging cable. Tomorrow she would be discharged from the hospital. She needed to arrange secure transport to a secluded extended-stay hotel. She needed to physically distance herself from the impending blast radius. Because when Richard Sterling informed the family that the house actually belonged to an untouchable trust, the quiet deception would end. The panic would begin. Derek gripped the leather steering wheel of his sedan. His knuckles turned a pale, translucent shade. The morning Maryland sun baked the windshield, raising the temperature inside the enclosed cabin. He refused to remove his charcoal wool coat. The heavy garment acted as a physical barrier against the escalating terror vibrating in his chest. Beverly sat in the passenger seat. She projected pristine calm. She wore a tailored ivory blazer and large designer sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the glare. She opened her leather handbag and retrieved a stiff manila folder. She placed the folder onto the center console. Derek stared at the plain cardboard cover. He knew what rested inside. "Open it," Beverly commanded. Her voice was flat. It carried the undeniable authority of a woman who had spent 3 decades scripting his every major life decision. Derek swallowed a dry knot in his throat. His fingers felt thick and clumsy as he flipped the cover back. Resting on top was a standard Maryland General Power of Attorney form. At the bottom of the page, a raised, circular seal embossed the paper. The notary stamp belonged to Gregory, his mother's loyal country club associate. Next to the seal was a signature, Louise Cleo. The cursive script looked remarkably accurate. Beverly had clearly spent hours practicing the loops and slants of her daughter-in-law's handwriting. But a glaring tactical error betrayed the forgery. The name was written in cheap blue friction ink. The fluid had bled slightly into the microscopic fibers of the legal paper, creating a faint, fuzzy halo around the letters. Louise never used blue pens. She only utilized archival-grade black ink for official documentation. To anyone who knew her meticulous habits, the blue signature was a blaring siren. "This is a Class 3 felony," Derek whispered. His voice cracked. He stared at the blue ink, feeling a cold sweat break across his forehead. "If the state catches us, I go to a federal penitentiary. I lose my logistics career. I lose my corporate licenses." Beverly reached over and snapped the folder shut. Her manicured nails clicked sharply against the cardboard. "You will lose much more than a corporate license if you do not walk into that brokerage office right now." Derek closed his eyes. The memory of the encrypted text messages from the offshore syndicate flashed behind his eyelids. The loan sharks did not care about his corporate title or his tailored suits. They cared about the $312,000 he owed them. They promised to visit his downtown office. They promised to shatter his legs. Beverly leaned closer. Her expensive jasmine perfume filled the stagnant air of the cabin. She had bailed him out of academic probation in college. She had funded his fraternity dues. She had orchestrated his promotion by entertaining the regional directors at her estate. She expected a return on her lifelong investment. "The men you owe money to are not negotiating, Derek." Beverly spoke in a quiet, chilling cadence. "They will hurt you. Then they will come to my home. They will destroy our family name over your foolish gambling debts. You created this hazard. You will deliver the solution. Take the file." Derek opened his eyes. He reached into his coat pocket and wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. "What happens when Richard questions the deed ownership?" Beverly produced a second document from her handbag. It was a wrinkled, outdated property deed from 4 years ago, showing Luis Cleo as the sole individual owner. "You will present this to the broker," Beverly instructed. "Richard Sterling sent me an email late last night. His preliminary system check flagged a trust designation attached to the address. You will tell him the Cleo Independence Trust was a temporary tax shelter. You will say your wife dissolved the shell company last month to simplify her portfolio. Hand him this outdated deed as proof of the reversion." Derek frowned, staring at the old paper. "A simple digital query by a title attorney will prove this document is void." "We do not need to fool a title attorney today," Beverly corrected. "We only need to fool Richard Sterling today. We need him to lock the buyer into the escrow timeline. Richard is hungry for his commission. He will accept the easiest narrative you provide. Once the buyer wires the earnest deposit into the holding account, the momentum of the transaction will crush any bureaucratic hurdles. Just get the preliminary disclosures signed." Derek grabbed the manila folder. His hands shook. He stepped out of the stifling sedan and into the humid morning air. The luxury real estate brokerage occupied a prime corner lot in downtown Annapolis. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels showcased high-definition screens displaying million-dollar waterfront estates. Derek pushed through the heavy glass door. The interior climate control hit him with a blast of frigid air. A receptionist pointed him toward a glass-walled office in the back. Richard Sterling sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk. The broker wore a crisp white shirt, a silk tie, and a predatory smile. Derek entered the office and took a seat in a sleek leather guest chair. He placed the manila folder onto the polished wood surface. "Derek, my friend." Richard leaned forward, tapping a platinum pen against his knuckles. "I am glad you arrived early. We have an eager buyer pacing the floorboards. The developer wants to initiate the wire transfer by tomorrow afternoon. However, my internal system flagged a minor discrepancy regarding the property title. A trust designation popped up on a secondary database." Derek tightened his grip on the armrests. He forced a casual, dismissive chuckle. The sound felt hollow in his own ears. "Yes, my mother mentioned your email. That trust was just a temporary corporate shell. Louise set it up last year for some tax optimization strategies. She dissolved the entity a few weeks ago to streamline our assets before her surgery." Derek slid the outdated property deed across the desk. "This is the reversion document confirming the property is back under her individual name. And here is the general power of attorney executed last night. Louise is too medicated to review the fine print, so she authorized me to sign the seller disclosures. Richard picked up the documents. He studied the outdated deed. He scrutinized the forged blue signature on the notary page. For a terrifying 10 seconds, the room fell silent. Derek listened to the quiet hum of the air conditioning vent. He watched the broker's eyes scan the paragraphs. Richard possessed the industry experience to recognize a flawed chain of title. A seasoned real estate professional would immediately demand an updated certified digital abstract from the county clerk. A diligent agent would call the notary public to verify the seal. But Richard Sterling did not operate on diligence. He operated on greed. Representing both the selling family and the purchasing developer meant Richard would secure a dual agency commission. The payout on a luxury cash deal would easily exceed $70,000. Questioning the outdated deed meant delaying the transaction. Delaying the transaction meant risking the buyer's fragile temper. Richard slid the documents into his own active file. He offered a bright, artificial grin. Excellent. This paperwork satisfies my compliance checklist. We will draft the final settlement statement and forward everything to the title insurance company for the closing routine. Derek exhaled. The breath rushed out of his lungs in a sudden, dizzying wave of relief. He had passed the barrier. The broker accepted the lie. Richard pushed a stack of preliminary seller disclosures across the mahogany desk. He handed Derek the platinum pen. "Sign on the highlighted tabs, please." Derek clicked the pen. He signed his own name on the proxy lines, legally binding his wife to a fraudulent sale. Every stroke of the ink felt like stepping over an invisible edge. He was committing a federal crime in a glass office while sipping complimentary sparkling water. He finished the stack and returned the pen. "We are on schedule," Richard announced, standing up to offer a firm handshake. "Tell Louise to focus on healing. I will handle the heavy lifting." Derek walked out of the brokerage. The morning sunlight felt different now. It felt bright and promising. He pulled his smartphone from his coat pocket and opened his encrypted messaging application. He typed a rapid response to the syndicate contact. "Funds secured. Wire transfer initiates Friday." He hit send. The message delivered. Derek stood on the sidewalk, a profound sense of victory washing over his tired body. He survived. He outsmarted the loan sharks. He navigated his mother's dangerous scheme. He secured his luxury penthouse. He climbed back into the driver's side of his silver sedan. Beverly looked at him, raising an elegant eyebrow. "It is done," Derek said, tossing the empty manila folder onto the dashboard. Richard accepted everything. The buyer is funding the escrow account tomorrow. Beverly smiled. A genuine expression of triumph illuminated her face. "I told you, Derek. The system bends for people who know how to push it." Derek started the engine. He steered the vehicle away from the curb, joining the flow of Annapolis traffic. He believed the crisis had passed. He believed he had successfully traded his wife's security for his own freedom. He remained entirely unaware that Richard Sterling was merely a middleman. The true gatekeeper was the buyer's title attorney. And while Derek celebrated his fleeting victory in a hot silver sedan, the title insurance investigators were currently logging into the official state registry, preparing to discover a legal fortress that could never be breached. The snare was tightening, and Derek had just placed his own neck perfectly inside the loop. The rhythmic metallic click echoed through the private executive suite. A heavy platinum pen tapped a steady, unyielding beat against the pristine surface of a polished mahogany desk. Richard Sterling sat perfectly still in his leather chair. He normally dominated his own office space. He usually controlled the flow of conversation, dictating terms to nervous sellers and anxious buyers with practiced ease. Today, the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The man sitting across the desk did not project the typical eager energy of a real estate investor. He projected the cold, clinical precision of an executioner. His name was Victor Silas. He represented a corporate entity listed on the purchase agreement as Apex Equity Holdings. Silas did not wear a bespoke tailored suit or a vibrant silk tie. He wore a dark, utilitarian sports coat over a plain black shirt. His eyes resembled cracked ice. He lacked any trace of charm or professional warmth. Silas stopped tapping the platinum pen. He rested his large, calloused hands on the mahogany wood. "We are not experiencing a satisfactory timeline, Richard." Silas spoke in a low, gravelly cadence that commanded instant obedience. "My employers authorized an all-cash purchase. We waived the property inspection. We waived the standard appraisal period. We provided a certified proof of funds within a single hour of the listing going live. We expect corresponding velocity from your end." Richard adjusted his collar. The fabric felt suddenly restrictive against his throat. "I assure you, Mr. Silas, the sellers are moving with maximum urgency." Derek Cleo delivered the preliminary disclosures and the signed proxy forms this morning. We forwarded the entire package to the title insurance agency. They are preparing the final settlement statement as we speak. Silas leaned forward. The leather guest chair creaked under his weight. "You misunderstand our operational parameters. We are not purchasing a colonial home to admire the customized crown molding. My organization is executing a targeted liquidation. The current occupant holds a specific outstanding liability. We are stepping in to claim the collateral and balance the ledger." Richard nodded quickly, eager to maintain rapport. He interpreted the statement through the narrow lens of his own industry. He assumed Luis Cleo owed a local bank or a private lender, resulting in a distressed sale. He remained entirely oblivious to the terrifying subtext. "We are transferring an initial clearing tranche of $312,000 to satisfy the primary deficit." Silas continued his gaze boring into Richard. "The remaining equity will disperse according to the escrow instructions, but the window for this transaction is rapidly closing. My employers do not grant extensions. They do not accept bureaucratic excuses." Richard recognized that specific uneven number. $312,000. It was a bizarre amount for an initial funding tranche on a luxury property. Most developers wired round figures or standard percentage deposits. He ignored the strange numerical value. He only cared about the dual agency commission riding on the outcome. Representing both the buyer and the seller, guaranteed a payout exceeding $74,000. Richard desperately needed that capital. He projected an image of immense wealth across Annapolis, but his personal finances mirrored a sinking ship. He owed a staggering sum in back taxes. He leased a foreign sports car he could not afford to maintain. His ex-wife recently filed a motion to increase her monthly support payments. If this transaction stalled, his carefully curated lifestyle would collapse into public ruin. "Friday," Silas stated. His voice dropped another octave, eliminating any room for negotiation. "We require the physical keys and the recorded deed by Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. If the escrow officer does not confirm the recording by 1 minute past 3, we pull our earnest money deposit. We withdraw the offer. And my associates will visit Derek Cleo in person to discuss alternative collection methods." A bead of cold sweat formed at the base of Richard's neck. He swallowed the dry, metallic taste in his mouth. "Understood. Friday at 3. I will personally supervise the title officers. There will be no delays." Silas stood up. He did not offer a handshake. He placed the platinum pen into his interior coat pocket. "Deliver the asset, Richard." The tall, intimidating man walked out of the glass-walled office. Richard collapsed back into his chair. His heart hammered against his ribs. The developer was volatile and dangerous. The threat to visit the seller in person crossed a severe professional boundary. But the promise of the commission eclipsed his rising terror. He needed to force this deal through the pipeline. He grabbed his smartphone from the desk and dialed Derek. The phone rang 4 times before the husband answered. Derek sounded breathless. His voice carried the distinct echo of a busy downtown street. "Hello, Richard. Is the settlement statement ready to sign?" Richard bypassed all pleasantries. "We have a critical situation, Derek. Your buyer just walked out of my office." He delivered a hard ultimatum. "We must record the deed and hand over the keys by Friday at 3 o'clock. If we miss that deadline by a single second, he pulls the cash and terminates the contract." A sharp gasp transmitted through the cellular connection. Friday, That is only 2 days from now. You promised me a 10-day window. The developer altered the terms. Richard barked, refusing to absorb any blame. He claims you have an outstanding liability that requires immediate balancing. He is wiring an exact tranche of $312,000 to clear the primary hurdle. The line went dead silent. Derek, are you still there? A ragged, uneven exhale sounded through the speaker. Yes, I am here. Did he say 312? Yes, Richard snapped. It is a strange number, but the funds are verified. The money is waiting. But his patience is gone. You need to pressure your mother and your sister to clear out their personal belongings today. If the title company requests any additional supporting documentation, you must provide it instantly. You cannot hesitate. You cannot stall. If you drop the ball, this buyer is going to walk away, and he made it very clear he will hold you personally responsible for the failure. I understand, Derek whispered. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of all remaining bravado. I will handle it. Just get the title cleared. Richard ended the call. He tossed the phone onto the mahogany desk. He had successfully transferred the crushing pressure onto the sellers. Panic bred compliance. A terrified client never questioned the fine print or haggled over minor closing fees. Derek and Beverly would sprint blindly toward the Friday deadline, making them wonderfully easy to manipulate. Richard turned his attention to his dual computer monitors. He opened his email client, refreshing the inbox. He expected a routine confirmation message from the escrow officer containing the draft settlement statement. A new message appeared at the top of the queue. The sender was Beatrice Caldwell, a senior title attorney at the designated insurance agency. The subject line glowed in urgent red lettering. Title clearance rejected. Transaction paused. Richard frowned. He clicked the bold text opening the electronic correspondence. His eyes scanned the crisp, formal paragraphs. Mr. Sterling, we initiated the standard municipal background verification utilizing the property identification number provided in your listing agreement. We cannot proceed with the drafting of the settlement statement. The preliminary disclosures you submitted this morning are legally invalid. The cold sweat returned, flooding Richard's palms. He gripped the edge of the desk. He read the next paragraph, his pulse roaring in his ears. The outdated warranty deed supplied by Derek Cleo does not reflect the current chain of ownership. According to the official Maryland County Registry recorded 7 months prior, the physical real estate is no longer held by an individual entity. The property was legally conveyed into an irrevocable living trust titled the Cleo Independence Trust. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to tilt. The general power of attorney executed by Derek Cleo is insufficient, Beatrice wrote, delivering the fatal blow. A standard proxy grants authority over a person. It does not grant authority over a protected trust. To legally authorize the transfer of this deed, our underwriters require the verified signature of the named sole trustee. You must procure the signature of Louise Cleo, acting in her official capacity as trustee, before we can clear this file for closing. Richard stared at the glowing screen. The trap snapped shut around his ankles. Derek had lied to him. Beverly had handed him a worthless piece of paper. The family did not own the Colonial. They were attempting to sell a fortress they could not legally access. The buyer's ultimatum echoed in his mind. Friday at 3 o'clock. Richard picked up his smartphone. His hands trembled so severely he nearly dropped the device. He needed to call Derek back. He needed to inform the desperate husband that the quiet bureaucratic loophole they relied upon had just transformed into an impenetrable concrete wall. The polite deception was over. The vicious fight for survival was about to begin. A private medical transport van navigated the quiet, brick-paved streets of Annapolis. Louise sat in the rear passenger compartment. A stiff, elastic binder wrapped tightly around her core, holding her surgical incisions secure against the gentle swaying of the vehicle. She stared out the tinted windows, watching the familiar storefronts glide past. The driver turned into the covered portico of an upscale extended-stay hotel. Louise had arranged this specific accommodation prior to her hospital discharge. The facility offered anonymous corporate suites, restricted keycard elevator access, and a crucial geographic distance from her occupied colonial property. She needed a secure vantage point. The transport attendant assisted her into a wheelchair and guided her through the polished marble lobby. A concierge handed over a magnetic room key. Minutes later, Louise stood alone inside a 7th-floor suite. The room felt delightfully sterile. A beige fabric sofa rested opposite a glass coffee table. A compact kitchenette gleamed with untouched stainless steel appliances. It was devoid of personal history or family artifacts. It was the perfect tactical command center. Louise lowered herself onto the sofa cushions. A dull throb radiated from her abdomen, but her mind operated with crystalline sharpness. She arranged her digital tablet and a pristine black ink pen onto the glass surface. The trap she engineered months ago was armed. Richard Sterling possessed the forged documents. The eager cash buyer was preparing the escrow funds. But to ensure maximum devastation, Louise needed her adversaries to sprint toward the edge of the cliff without looking down. Desperate individuals often operate on high alert. If Derek and Beverly anticipated a legitimate legal battle over the Maryland property, they might scramble to secure emergency counsel. They might discover the trust designation before the title company officially rejected the transaction. Louise needed them complacent. She needed to manufacture a false victory to blind them. She unlocked her tablet and opened her encrypted email application. She initiated a new message addressed to her husband. The subject line read, "Proposed marital dissolution and asset settlement." Louise crafted the paragraphs with calculated resignation. She adopted the tone of a defeated, exhausted spouse. She wrote that the surgical complication and the ensuing family hostility had drained her fighting spirit. She claimed she wanted a rapid, clean break from the marriage and the Annapolis residence. She proposed a simple, unilateral compromise. She would relinquish all claims to the colonial home and sign any required closing documents in exchange for a meager $50,000 buyout payable immediately after the real estate transaction cleared. $50,000 represented an insulting fraction of the actual accumulated equity. It was a pathetic concession, and that made it the perfect bait. The sum was low enough to trigger Beverly's inherent greed, while validating Derek's cowardly assumption that his wife would always prioritize peace over justice. They would read the digital correspondence and assume Louise had officially surrendered. They would view the $50,000 as a cheap exit tax. Louise tapped the send icon. The digital bait vanished into the cellular network. She leaned back against the beige upholstery and visualized the immediate future. Derek would receive the notification on his smartphone. He would read the text while sitting in his silver sedan. He would call his mother, his voice breathless with unearned triumph. Beverly would smile, pouring a celebratory glass of sparkling water. They would believe the pathway was clear. The offshore creditors would receive their pound of flesh. The luxury downtown lease would remain secure. Vanessa could cover her bounced boutique payroll. The troublesome wife was discarded for pennies on the dollar. Their guard would drop entirely. The silent waiting commenced. Louise watched the digital clock on her tablet screen. Time ticked forward in slow, methodical increments. 40 minutes later, a secure notification pinged. It was a direct, encrypted portal message from Marcus Thorne, her estate attorney. The text was concise, delivering the exact bureaucratic sequence Louise had orchestrated. The title insurance agency formally rejected the seller disclosures. Beatrice Caldwell, the senior escrow officer, had run the final municipal verification through the state registry. The system flagged the warranty deed. The forged proxy paperwork Derek submitted earlier that morning was legally void. A standard power of attorney granted authority over Louise, the individual. It carried zero legal weight over the Clio Independence Trust. The transaction was officially frozen. The title company demanded the verified signature of the named sole trustee to proceed. Marcus requested further instructions. He anticipated Richard Sterling would attempt to bombard his law firm with phone calls, hoping to negotiate a rapid resolution or secure a signature courier. Louise typed a single sentence in response: "Remain entirely silent and decline all incoming communications from the brokerage." She locked the screen. She wanted Richard Sterling to sweat through his tailored white shirt. She wanted Derek to experience the visceral horror of a collapsing lifeline. When a title company halts a rapid cash closing, the administrative pressure reverberates backward through the entire chain. The dangerous developer would threaten the broker. The broker would scream at the husband. Derek would realize the $50,000 divorce settlement was a worthless piece of paper. The illusion of control would shatter, replaced by the terrifying reality of the Friday deadline. A soft growl from her stomach reminded Louise she had not consumed solid food since Monday evening. She picked up the suite telephone and dialed the hospitality desk. She ordered a turkey club sandwich and a pot of hot chamomile tea. Her voice remained steady and polite, betraying no hint of the psychological warfare she was currently conducting. She replaced the telephone receiver and toggled her tablet back to the home network security dashboard. She bypassed the camera feeds and opened the geolocation tracking interface. During her initial forensic sweep of Derek's encrypted folders, she had silently enabled the GPS locator beacon on his smartphone. A digital map of downtown Annapolis populated the display. A pulsing blue dot represented her husband. 10 minutes ago, the dot had remained stationary near the luxury real estate brokerage office. Now, the icon was moving. It was not traveling toward the corporate logistics firm. It was not heading toward the country club estate. The dot navigated the digital grid with erratic, frantic velocity. Louise watched the location marker run a red traffic signal on West Street. It swerved through a narrow side alley, exceeding the posted speed limits. The driving pattern depicted sheer, unadulterated panic. Richard Sterling had delivered the fatal news. Derek knew the forged signature had failed. He knew the untouchable trust stood between his physical safety and the offshore loan sharks. And he knew his wife was the only human being on Earth who held the key to the vault. Louise zoomed in on the map interface. The blue dot turned onto her current street, accelerating directly toward the extended stay hotel. Derek was coming to confront her. He was likely bringing his mother and sister to enforce their collective will through sheer intimidation. They were racing to demand the trustee's signature before the buyer withdrew the funds. Louise adjusted her abdominal binder. She smoothed the fabric of her recovery garment. She was no longer a sedated patient trapped in a vulnerable medical ward. She was the architect of their impending ruin, waiting patiently inside a secure, anonymous suite. She watched the blue dot cross the final intersection. The predators rushing toward her location believed they were cornering their prey. They did not realize they were walking willingly into an execution chamber. Vanessa sat in the back seat of her brother's silver sedan, her acrylic nails digging crescent moons into her palms. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed bright green, displaying 2:14 in the afternoon. The bank wire deadline was exactly 5 o'clock. If the required capital did not deposit into her commercial operating account by the close of the business day, the State Labor Board would initiate a formal investigation into her boutique. Bouncing multiple payroll checks across distinct tax jurisdictions constituted felony fraud. The threat of a prison sentence was no longer an abstract concept. It was a tangible, looming reality breathing down her neck. She stared at the back of Derek's head. Her brother steered the vehicle with erratic, jerky motions, swerving dangerously through the historic Annapolis traffic. He smelled of stale sweat and sheer terror. Beside him, Beverly sat rigidly in the passenger seat, clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest like a shield. The matriarch's flawless composure had fractured. Her jaw was locked tight, and she had abandoned her designer sunglasses. The polite facade they maintained for the country club was gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered desperation. The car jerked to a halt under the covered portico of a discreet, extended-stay corporate hotel. Vanessa marched behind her mother and brother, her suede boots clicking a frantic rhythm against the polished marble floor. The lobby was designed for anonymous business travelers, featuring quiet alcoves and dim recessed lighting. Derek approached the concierge desk. He deployed his tailored charm, though a slight tremor betrayed his underlying panic. He presented his driver's license and a digitized copy of their marriage certificate on his phone screen. He wove a convincing, sympathetic narrative for the young clerk. He explained his wife had discharged herself from the surgical ward early, acting against explicit medical advice. He requested immediate access to her suite, citing grave, urgent concerns regarding her postoperative mental stability. The clerk, intimidated by the wealthy, insistent family, coded a master keycard without demanding a police escort. The elevator ascent felt agonizingly slow. The metal box trapped the heavy scent of Beverly's jasmine perfume, mixing it with the sour tang of Derek's fear. Vanessa checked her smartphone screen. 14 missed calls from her store manager. The vendors were refusing to unload the seasonal inventory. She muted the device, her stomach churning with acidic dread. The doors parted on the 7th floor. They navigated the quiet, carpeted hallway, their footsteps muffled by the thick flooring. They stopped outside suite 712. Derek slid the plastic rectangle into the electronic lock. A sharp, distinct click echoed in the silent corridor. A tiny green light flashed. He pushed the heavy wooden door inward. They flooded the room, transforming the airy corporate suite into a claustrophobic interrogation cell. The space was devoid of personal touches, featuring a small kitchenette and a modest sitting area. Louise sat on a beige fabric sofa. A half-eaten turkey sandwich and a steaming cup of chamomile tea rested on a glass coffee table in front of her. She wore a stiff surgical binder over a simple cotton shirt. She did not look surprised by the sudden home invasion. She did not flinch or reach for the telephone. She simply placed her porcelain teacup onto its matching saucer. The profound calm emanating from her infuriated Vanessa. How could this woman sit there sipping herbal tea while their entire familial structure crumbled into ash? Derek immediately stepped sideways, positioning his broad shoulders to block the primary exit. The physical barrier was an unspoken, terrifying threat. No one was leaving until the paperwork was signed. Beverly advanced to the center of the room, tossing the manila envelope onto the glass table. The documents spilled outward, revealing pristine legal instruments drafted by the desperate title company. The paperwork was designed to dissolve the Clio Independence Trust and revert the property deed back to individual ownership, clearing the path for Derek's forged proxy to function. "Sign them," Beverly ordered. Her voice lacked its usual polished cadence. It was a raw, guttural command. "You petty, vindictive child. You orchestrated this absurd trust arrangement to humiliate us. You are jeopardizing Derek's career and Vanessa's livelihood over a trivial misunderstanding. You need to fix this right now." Vanessa stepped forward, pointing an accusing finger at the woman on the sofa. "My employees are threatening to call the authorities. I am facing criminal charges because you decided to play accounting games with family assets. We are losing everything. You owe us that equity to make us whole." Louise looked at Vanessa. The dark, analytical eyes evaluated the stolen vintage diamond tennis bracelet glittering on Vanessa's wrist. Vanessa instinctively pulled her blazer sleeve down, a sudden flush of guilt burning her cheeks, but she maintained her hostile stance. "I owe you nothing," Louise replied. Her tone was eerily even, measuring the acoustics of the room. "You invaded my property. You listed my sanctuary for sale while I bled in a recovery ward. You stole jewelry from my nightstand. The real estate transaction is dead. The buyer is gone." "The transaction is merely pausing," Derek interrupted from the doorway, his voice cracking under the strain. "The developer is giving us until 5 o'clock. 5, Louise. The men backing this cash purchase are not legitimate investors. If this deal falls apart, they are going to find me. They are going to hurt me. Is that what you want? Do you want your husband hospitalized?" Louise turned her attention to the man blocking the door. "You gambled away $312,000 to an offshore syndicate. You offered my home to save your own kneecaps. Your physical injuries are not my liability." Derek went pale. The color drained from Beverly's face. The revelation that Louise knew the exact numerical value of the hidden debt shattered their remaining leverage. They realized the $50,000 divorce settlement email they celebrated an hour ago was a calculated decoy. She had played them. She had always been 3 steps ahead. The panic in the room reached a boiling point. Beverly refused to accept defeat. The matriarch lunged forward, hovering over the glass table, her shadow falling across the recovering patient. "You are sick," Beverly hissed, attempting to utilize pure psychological domination. "The anesthesia has warped your brain. You are experiencing a paranoid episode. Sign the dissolution papers right now, or I will drag a psychiatric evaluation team into this hotel and have you committed to a state facility. We will strip your medical rights and your financial autonomy before the sun sets. We will declare you incompetent." Vanessa watched her mother cross the line into undeniable coercion. The threat of forced institutionalization hung in the stale air. It was a terrifying ultimatum. Yet Louise did not scream for help. She did not cower or beg for mercy. Beverly unzipped a pocket on her designer handbag. She pulled out a pen. It was the same cheap blue friction ink writing instrument she had brandished in the hospital room days earlier. Beverly grabbed Louis's right wrist. The older woman's grip was tight, her manicured nails digging into Louis's pale skin. Beverly physically forced the blue plastic barrel into her daughter-in-law's palm, dragging her hand toward the binding legal documents. "Sign it," Beverly snarled, her face inches from Louise. "Sign the papers or lose your freedom." Vanessa held her breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. She expected Louise to fight back, to throw the hot tea, to scream until the neighboring guests summoned the local police. The tension was an unbearable weight pressing against her ribs. Instead, Louise relaxed her arm. She stopped resisting the physical pressure exerted by her mother-in-law. She allowed her fingers to wrap around the cheap blue barrel. She looked up at Beverly, offering a chilling, vacant stare. The false surrender was executed with flawless precision, tricking the desperate family into believing they had finally broken her spirit. The plastic barrel of the pen felt warm against Louise's palm. Beverly maintained her physical grip on Louise's right wrist, her manicured fingernails digging crescent moons into the pale skin. The older woman's breathing was shallow and rapid, betraying the sheer panic hiding beneath her country club exterior. Derek stood frozen by the hotel suite door, a heavy sentinel guarding the only exit, while Vanessa hovered near the glass coffee table, her eyes darting between the legal documents and the digital clock on her smartphone. This was the exact writing instrument Beverly had utilized to mock her in the surgical recovery ward days ago. A cheap promotional pen filled with blue friction ink. The matriarch viewed the item as a tool of humiliation, a way to force her meticulous daughter-in-law to sign binding medical forms with inferior supplies. Louise viewed the pen through a much different lens. In the realm of forensic document examination, friction ink possessed a distinct fatal flaw. The chemical composition of the fluid degraded and vanished when exposed to direct heat. A simple pass under a high-intensity scanner or a focused laser pointer would render the signature invisible, leaving behind nothing but blank paper. Beverly had unwittingly handed her the perfect instrument of sabotage. Louise allowed her muscles to relax. She yielded to the downward pressure exerted by her mother-in-law. Beverly exhaled a sharp breath of triumph and released her grip, stepping back to allow Louise the necessary space to write. Louise touched the metal tip to the crisp white parchment. The document was a formal deed reversion, drafted by the desperate title insurance agency, designed to dissolve the Clio Independence Trust and return the Maryland Colonial to individual ownership. She began to trace her first name. Her handwriting remained steady, betraying none of the physical pain radiating from her abdominal incisions. As she reached her middle name, she initiated the trap. Her legal middle name was Marie. She deliberately swapped the vowels, spelling it M-A-R-E-I. To the untrained, panicked eyes of her relatives, the subtle transposition would register as a simple typographical error caused by medical fatigue. To a trained notary or a federal investigator, it constituted a glaring irregularity. She finished her surname. Then, just below the final loop of the letter O, she added 2 distinct capital letters, VC. The letters stood for V coactus. It was a Latin legal doctrine, translating directly to having been forced. In the specialized field of forensic accounting and high-stakes corporate litigation, appending those two characters to a binding contract served as a silent, undeniable distress signal. It legally documented that the signatory was operating under severe physical or psychological duress. The presence of those letters instantly nullified the validity of the document from the moment the ink dried. Louise lifted the pen. She placed it carefully beside the porcelain teacup on the glass table. Beverly snatched the paperwork with blinding speed. The matriarch did not pause to examine the cursive script. She did not notice the misspelled middle name or the subtle Latin distress signal. Her vision was entirely obscured by greed and the promise of impending salvation. She shoved the documents into her manila envelope and clutched it to her chest. Derek slumped against the wooden door frame. The rigid tension holding his spine upright evaporated. He wiped a fresh layer of perspiration from his forehead, his chest heaving as he drew a deep, unobstructed breath. He believed he had just rescued himself from the offshore syndicate. He believed his kneecaps were safe, his luxury penthouse was secure, and his debts were erased. "We are leaving, Beverly," commanded her voice, regaining its familiar, arrogant cadence. She turned her back on her daughter-in-law, dismissing Louise as a conquered adversary. "Do not attempt to contact the brokerage office. Derek will arrange for your personal belongings to be boxed and placed into temporary storage." Vanessa tapped the screen of her smartphone. "It is 2:45. We have to navigate through the downtown traffic to reach the escrow office before the 4 o'clock wire deadline. If we miss the cutoff, the funds will not deposit until Monday morning. We cannot wait until Monday." The three of them scrambled toward the exit. Derek pulled the heavy wooden door open, stepping into the carpeted hallway to clear a path for his mother and sister. They did not offer a single word of gratitude or a final glance of remorse. They operated on pure, predatory instinct, rushing to consume the resources they believed they had successfully stolen. The heavy door swung shut, the automatic locking mechanism engaged with a definitive metallic click. Silence descended upon the hotel suite. The claustrophobic energy dissipated, leaving behind the sterile, quiet atmosphere of the anonymous room. Louise did not collapse against the sofa cushions. She did not shed tears of relief. Her pulse remained a steady, rhythmic beat. She picked up the porcelain teacup and took a slow sip of the warm chamomile tea, letting the soothing liquid coat her throat. She retrieved her digital tablet and a pair of encrypted wireless earbuds. She inserted the earpieces and opened her secure communication application. The timeline was critical. The bait was in transit. She needed to deploy the net before her relatives reached the mahogany boardroom. She dialed the first number. The line connected to the private office of Marcus Thorne, her estate attorney. Marcus, Louise spoke, her voice crisp and authoritative. "The hostile party has obtained the signed reversion documents. They are currently en route to the title agency to execute the final settlement statement. The signature is compromised." I utilized the friction ink and embedded the coercion marker. "Understood," Marcus replied, his tone echoing her clinical precision. "The document is legally radioactive. I am dispatching a certified digital notice to the title insurance underwriter, alerting them to a pending fraudulent conveyance. They will halt the escrow disbursement the moment those papers touch their desk." "Do not stop the meeting," Lewis instructed. "Let them sit in the boardroom. Let the buyer present the capital. I want every participant locked inside that room when the authorities arrive." "I will coordinate the timing," Marcus confirmed, disconnecting the line. Louise dialed the second sequence of digits. This connection routed directly to the fraud division of the Maryland State Police. During her tenure as a corporate auditor, Louise had collaborated with numerous state detectives to dismantle embezzlement rings. She possessed direct contact information for the lead investigator of the Financial Crimes Unit. "Detective Carter," Louise said when the gruff voice answered. "I am initiating a formal report for familial coercion, elder and dependent adult abuse, and grand theft of real estate. The suspects are currently transporting forged legal instruments to a commercial escrow office in downtown Annapolis." Carter recognized her voice instantly. Louise, Give me the address. I am rolling 2 unmarked units right now. She provided the precise location of Richard Sterling's preferred title agency. She detailed the nature of the false medical proxy Derek had utilized earlier in the day, ensuring the state police understood the severity of the forged notary seal. She terminated the connection with the state detective and initiated the final, most devastating call. She dialed the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Federal jurisdiction was required due to the specific nature of the crime. Utilizing electronic banking systems to transfer illicit funds across state or international borders constituted federal wire fraud. A dispatch agent answered the secure line. "My name is Louise Cleo." She stated, her posture perfectly straight on the beige sofa. "I am reporting an active, coordinated wire fraud conspiracy involving an offshore gambling syndicate and a coerced real estate transaction. The perpetrators are attempting to authorize a fraudulent interstate wire transfer exceeding $300,000. The transaction is scheduled to occur within the next 60 minutes. The federal agent requested the pertinent identification details. Louise provided the corporate name of the cash buyer, Apex Equity Holdings, and linked the entity directly to the offshore cryptocurrency ledgers she had downloaded from her husband's hidden network partition. She handed the federal government the exact puzzle pieces required to freeze the syndicate's domestic accounts. "We have agents in the vicinity," the dispatcher confirmed, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. "We are coordinating with local law enforcement to secure the location." Louise ended the call. She removed the wireless earbuds and placed them onto the glass table next to the empty teacup. The snare was drawn tight. Derek, Beverly, and Vanessa were speeding through the Annapolis streets, clutching a piece of paper that guaranteed their destruction. They believed they were driving toward financial salvation. They were driving into an impenetrable ambush. Louise rested her hands on her lap. She visualized the plush executive boardroom at the title agency. She pictured Richard Sterling waiting with his glossy folders. She pictured the dangerous syndicate representative demanding the keys. The collision of greed, panic, and federal law enforcement was imminent. The silent alarm was ringing, and the ensuing shockwave would level her husband's entire world. Derek crossed the threshold of the commercial escrow office. The aggressive air conditioning chilled the damp fabric of his shirt. He followed the receptionist down a wide hallway lined with frosted glass panels. Beverly walked beside him, her head held high, projecting the aura of a wealthy patron claiming her rightful prize. Vanessa trailed closely behind, checking her smartphone screen every few seconds, frantic to confirm the incoming wire routing numbers. They entered the primary executive boardroom. A sprawling, polished mahogany table dominated the space. Richard Sterling stood near the window, his usual confident posture replaced by a rigid, nervous stance. Victor Silas sat at the far end of the table, his dark coat blending into the shadows of the leather chair. Silas did not offer a greeting. He merely tapped a platinum pen against the wood, a rhythmic countdown to his Friday deadline. At the head of the table sat Beatrice Caldwell, the senior title attorney. She wore a tailored gray suit and wire-rimmed reading glasses. She exuded a strict, unyielding professionalism. Derek took a seat opposite the attorney. He placed the manila folder onto the smooth mahogany surface. He slid the cardboard package across the table. "The time is 3:48, Richard announced, his voice tight. "If we verify the signatures and finalize the settlement statement right now, we can initiate the wire transfer before the banking cutoff. Mr. Silas has already authorized the release of the clearing tranche." Beatrice did not rush. She opened the folder with deliberate precision. She extracted the reversion documents Louise had signed in the hotel suite. The crisp white paper rustled in the quiet room. Beatrice adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and lowered her gaze to the signature line. Derek watched her eyes. He expected a quick nod of approval, followed by the slide of the final escrow agreement. He expected the crushing weight of his hidden offshore debts to lift from his shoulders. Instead, Beatrice frowned. Her index finger traced the letters of the signature. She leaned closer, inspecting the blue ink. The rhythmic tapping of Silas's pen stopped. The silence in the boardroom turned sharp and heavy. "Is there a problem?" Beverly asked. Her voice held a note of forced polite curiosity. "My daughter-in-law was quite fatigued, but the signature is legitimate. We witnessed her sign it just 30 minutes ago." Beatrice looked up, her expression shifting from bureaucratic boredom to clinical alarm. She placed the document flat onto the table. She directed her gaze entirely at Derek. "Mr. Cleo," Beatrice said, her tone stripping away all professional courtesy, "your wife's legal middle name is Marie. She spelled it M-A-R-E-I on this binding document." Derek forced a dismissive laugh. He wiped his palms on his trousers. "She is recovering from a major surgical procedure. The pain medication makes her drowsy. A minor spelling error does not invalidate her consent." "It is not merely a spelling error," Beatrice corrected, her voice dropping into a severe, authoritative register. She turned the document around, pushing it back toward the center of the mahogany table. Just below the signature line, she appended 2 distinct capital letters, V.C. Richard leaned over the table, squinting at the faint blue ink. "What does that mean?" "It is a Latin legal designation," Beatrice explained, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the family members. "V coactus." It translates to having been forced. In the field of forensic accounting and complex contract law, appending those specific characters is a recognized distress signal. It legally signifies that the signatory executed the document under physical or psychological duress. The air vanished from Derek's lungs. The plush leather chair felt like a trap closing around his ribs. The spelling error was intentional. Beatrice continued her words, landing like precise hammer strikes. It was designed to draw immediate scrutiny to the signature line. The presence of that Latin marker instantly nullifies the validity of this reversion. This document is legally toxic. I cannot authorize a title transfer based on coerced consent. The transaction remains frozen. Derek stared at the 2 blue letters. V.C. His blood ran cold. The memory of the hotel suite crashed over him. Louise had not surrendered. She had not yielded to Beverly's physical intimidation. She had weaponized their panic, allowing them to drag a radioactive document into a federal banking institution. She had orchestrated the entire encounter, sitting on the beige sofa, sipping herbal tea, while weaving the final threads of their destruction. He was not the victor. He was the prey. Silas stood up. The heavy chair scraped against the hardwood floor. The facade of the legitimate Maryland developer shattered. "You lied to me," Silas growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He ignored the broker and the attorney, fixing his dead, icy stare solely on Derek. "You promised the asset was clear. You promised my employers their $312,000 today. You brought me a worthless piece of paper." Silas took a step around the mahogany table, his large hands clenching into fists. "I am going to collect my debt right now." Before Silas could close the distance, a heavy, synchronized thud echoed from the hallway. The frosted glass doors of the boardroom slid open with a sharp, mechanical hiss. 3 individuals stepped into the room, blocking the exit. 2 men wore plainclothes tactical gear, their utility belts displaying the silver badges of the Maryland State Police Fraud Division. The 3rd individual, a tall woman in a dark structured suit, held a leather credential wallet open in her right hand. The gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed in the overhead lighting. "Nobody moves," the federal agent commanded. Her voice was devoid of emotion, a cold instrument of bureaucratic authority. Silas froze mid-stride. His predatory instincts registered the overwhelming tactical disadvantage. He slowly raised his hands, stepping back from the table. The federal agent stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the occupants. "I am Special Agent Miller. We are executing a coordinated interagency freeze on this specific real estate transaction. We possess actionable intelligence regarding an active conspiracy to commit interstate wire fraud, the forgery of a notary seal, and the coercion of a protected trust asset." Richard Sterling collapsed into his chair, his face a pale, sickly shade of gray. He buried his face in his hands, realizing his luxury real estate career had just evaporated into a federal indictment. "This is absurd," Silas barked, dropping his arms. "I am a legitimate cash buyer. I placed a $100,000 earnest deposit into the escrow account. These people brought me a defective title. I am the victim here. I want my funds returned immediately." Agent Miller turned her clinical gaze toward the towering man. Victor Silas, operating as a collection proxy for an unregistered offshore gaming syndicate. "We have the encrypted communication logs linking you directly to Mr. Cleo, along with the cryptocurrency routing numbers tracing your earnest deposit to illicit accounts. You are not a victim. You are a participant in an extortion racket." One of the state detectives moved smoothly across the room, securing Silas by the arm and guiding him toward the wall. Silas did not struggle. He understood the definitive nature of federal evidence. Beverly stood up. She smoothed the front of her ivory blazer, adjusting her posture to project her signature country club elegance. She summoned a warm, apologetic smile, attempting to navigate the disaster with the same charm she used to dismiss an incorrect dinner order. "Officer," Beverly said, adopting a soothing, maternal tone, "there is a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law is suffering from a post-operative mental breakdown. We are simply trying to manage her affairs and secure a safer living arrangement for her recovery. The paperwork was rushed, but there is no fraud here. It is just a complicated family dispute. We can clear this up quietly." The second state detective approached Beverly. He did not return her smile. He did not acknowledge her tailored clothing or her refined cadence. He reached onto his utility belt and withdrew a pair of steel handcuffs. Beverly Cleo, the detective, stated, his voice flat and procedural. "You are under arrest for familial coercion, elder and dependent adult abuse, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The detective secured her right wrist, snapping the cold metal bracelet closed. Beverly stared at the steel cuff in profound, uncomprehending horror. The elegant facade cracked, exposing the terrified, bankrupt woman hiding beneath the cashmere. She opened her mouth to protest, to invoke her late husband's prestigious name, but the detective swiftly secured her left wrist, pulling her arms behind her back. The sharp, mechanical ratcheting of the handcuffs filled the silent boardroom. Vanessa shrank into the corner, pressing her back against the glass wall. She stared at her mother, then down at the stolen vintage diamond tennis bracelet resting on her own wrist. The realization hit her with staggering force. The boutique was gone. The payroll would bounce. She was wearing stolen property in front of federal agents. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking in silent, suffocated sobs. Derek remained seated at the mahogany table. He did not attempt to flee. He did not attempt to speak. He stared blankly at the reversion document, at the 2 tiny blue letters that had dismantled his entire existence. There was no screaming match. There was no dramatic physical altercation or theatrical display of grief. The room operated with the cold, unfeeling efficiency of the American justice system. The investigators collected the forged documents, slipping them into clear evidence bags. They escorted the suspects out of the boardroom one by one. Derek felt the heavy hand of a state detective grip his shoulder, lifting him from the leather chair. He walked toward the frosted glass doors, leaving behind the plush carpets and the promise of a luxury penthouse. He had traded his wife's security for a 10-day illusion, and the illusion had just reached its fatal expiration date. The Maryland morning air felt crisp and cool, carrying the faint, sweet scent of blooming dogwood trees across the manicured front lawn. Louise stood on the wraparound porch of her colonial. 3 weeks had passed since the boardroom detonation. The stiff, elastic surgical binder was gone, folded and discarded in a dark closet. Her abdominal incisions had knit together, leaving behind a thin, pale silver line across her skin. She inhaled a deep, unobstructed breath. The air tasted clean. The physical pain was a fading memory, replaced by a profound, enduring stillness. She held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, letting the heated porcelain warm her palms. She looked down at the pristine wooden planks beneath her bare feet. The physical space beneath her heels belonged solely to the Cleo Independence Trust. The phantom threat of the 10-day closing window, the frantic open house, the muddy footprints on her antique rugs, they all felt like a distant, chaotic nightmare. The predators had been excised from her territory. The justice system operated with an unfeeling, methodical precision. Louise spent her mornings on the porch reviewing the digital court dockets and the formal legal updates forwarded by her estate attorney, Marcus Thorne. The resolution was definitive and inescapable. Derek remained incarcerated in the county detention center. A district judge denied his bail application, citing the staggering offshore gambling debts as an undeniable flight risk. The syndicate abandoned him the moment the federal agents secured the title agency. He was no longer a profitable client. He was a radioactive federal target. Derek faced a mandatory minimum sentence for his role in the forged proxy submission. The offshore creditors drained his remaining checking accounts before the government could freeze them, forcing her husband to rely on an overworked, underfunded public defender. He sat in a concrete cell, stripped of his tailored suits and his corporate title, wearing a standard issue uniform. Beverly experienced a different, more excruciating execution. The federal indictments for familial coercion and wire fraud conspiracy carried a heavy, immediate financial toll. The government attached a lien to her sprawling estate to secure potential legal fines, freezing her liquid assets. The Annapolis social circuit reacted with swift, brutal efficiency. The yacht club revoked her membership credentials, erasing her from the roster overnight. Her lifelong friends stopped returning her phone calls, treating her sudden insolvency like a contagious disease. Beverly was trapped in a decaying, empty mansion, entirely isolated from the pedigree she spent her entire life worshiping. Her social standing was annihilated. The facade she worked decades to build shattered into irreparable pieces. Vanessa suffered the crushing weight of her own vanity. The state labor board audited the boutique after the payroll checks bounced across multiple tax jurisdictions. The commercial landlord taped a neon eviction notice to the glass storefront, locking the remaining seasonal inventory inside the dark building. The business plunged into immediate receivership. The luxury downtown penthouse lease defaulted 3 days later as the corporate veil of her limited liability company collapsed. The leasing agent changed the deadbolts, leaving Derek's expensive golf clubs and Vanessa's designer luggage trapped behind a legal barricade. Both siblings were rendered homeless by the very real estate scheme they engineered to save themselves. They bounced between cheap motels and the couches of distant, reluctant acquaintances. To compound her ruin, the vintage diamond tennis bracelet Vanessa stole during the open house was recovered during her booking process. The authorities logged the jewelry as evidence, adding a grand theft charge to her mounting legal disaster. Richard Sterling lost his primary weapon. The State Real Estate Commission launched a public inquiry into his dual agency practices and his failure to perform rudimentary title verifications. They permanently revoked his operating license for gross negligence. His bespoke suits and platinum watches could not secure a new position in the industry. He packed his mahogany desk into plastic storage bins, his reputation reduced to a cautionary tale among local brokers. The lucrative career he built on rapid, questionable transactions was over. Louise set her coffee mug onto the porch railing. She turned her attention to the item resting on the wooden swing. It was a standard, folded cardboard moving box. It was the exact box Beverly had dropped onto the foot of her hospital bed. The matriarch had presented the cardboard as a symbol of impending eviction, a subtle command to pack up and surrender the property. Louise retrieved a roll of clear packing tape from the windowsill. She unfolded the cardboard flaps, pressing the seams together to form a sturdy square. She did not need the box to pack her own belongings. She was using it to return the favor. She walked into the foyer and picked up a laundry basket resting near the staircase. The basket contained the last remnants of Derek's presence in the house. 3 faded, inexpensive synthetic golf shirts he had forgotten to pack when he relocated to the doomed luxury penthouse. 2 pairs of worn athletic socks. A plastic shaving razor. Louise dropped the items into the cardboard box. They landed with a pathetic, hollow thud. The meager contents represented the sum total of his contribution to their marriage. He had brought nothing of enduring value into her life, and he was leaving with even less. Louise folded the top flaps of the box and sealed them with a long, satisfying strip of packing tape. She smoothed the plastic adhesive over the cardboard seams, ensuring the package was secure. She peeled the backing off a pre-printed shipping label and pressed the square onto the center of the box. The destination address, printed in bold black ink, routed the parcel directly to the inmate processing center at the county detention facility. She lifted the sealed box and placed it near the porch steps for the outbound parcel carrier. The poetic symmetry of the gesture settled over her. Beverly brought the box to remove Louise from the home. Louise was utilizing the box to send her husband his final possessions in permanent exile. Louise turned back toward the heavy oak front door. The traditional brass deadbolt was gone. In its place rested a sleek, matte black biometric locking mechanism. She reached out, placing her right thumb against the tempered glass sensor. A quiet electronic chime sounded. A circular light ring flashed a brilliant, vibrant green. The internal steel bolt retracted with a heavy, definitive slide. Louise gripped the handle and pushed the door open. She stepped over the threshold into the cool, climate-controlled foyer. The interior smelled of fresh linen and lemon polish. The lingering scent of muddy suede boots and cheap cologne was eradicated. The house was profoundly, beautifully silent. She closed the door behind her, listening to the biometric lock automatically engage. She walked into the living room, claiming the space that belonged solely to her. The battle was over. She had allowed the predators to build their own cage, and she had locked the door from the outside. She sat down on the leather sofa, keeping the peace entirely on her own terms. The story of Louise Cleo does not conclude with the flash of a federal badge or the rigid click of steel handcuffs echoing through a polished mahogany boardroom. The true resonance of this narrative lingers long after the sirens fade, settling into the quiet, undisturbed spaces of that reclaimed Maryland colonial. When we strip away the forensic accounting, the irrevocable trusts, and the forged notary seals, what remains is a stark, unsettling mirror. It reflects the fragile architecture of the modern family, forcing us to examine the profound generational damage inflicted when parents prioritize the illusion of prestige over the difficult, unglamorous work of instilling genuine character. Consider the folded cardboard moving box left at the foot of a hospital bed. Consider a mother handing her son a falsified document, silently urging him to trade his spouse's security for his own survival. These are not merely isolated acts of theft. They are the terminal symptoms of a poisoned lineage. Parenting, at its core, is the transfer of values from one generation to the next. When a family operates on the foundational belief that resources can be seized rather than earned, they do not build a legacy. They construct a trap for their own children. Within the fabric of American culture, we frequently romanticize the concept of the self-made individual. We celebrate the rapid ascent to the corner office, the acquisition of the suburban estate, and the curated display of generational wealth. Yet we often neglect to discuss the ethical infrastructure required to sustain those achievements. When families prioritize the aesthetic of success over the mechanics of integrity, they cultivate a perilous environment where the ends constantly justify the means. Children raised in these environments learn to view morality as a flexible suggestion rather than an immovable pillar. They are taught to navigate the world as a series of shallow transactions, measuring human worth by utility rather than inherent dignity. Derek was not born a coward. His spinelessness was cultivated, watered day by day, by a mother who shielded him from accountability. Beverly taught her son that appearances eclipsed honesty, that financial deficits could be erased by exploiting the vulnerable, and that maintaining a polite facade was a valid substitute for genuine moral courage. By erasing his mistakes, she erased his spine. In traditional family structures, we often confuse protection with enabling. True parental guidance requires the painful restraint of allowing a child to face the fire of their own errors. When we shelter our youth from the heat, we send them into the world as fragile adults, men who will sweat through heavy wool coats rather than speak a difficult truth. Vanessa's descent mirrors this exact same flawed upbringing. Raised in a greenhouse of unearned entitlement, she viewed a stolen vintage diamond tennis bracelet not as a crime, but as a delayed inheritance. She absorbed the lesson that success is a visual aesthetic to be curated for an audience, rather than a slow, arduous climb built on dedication and sweat. The siblings were doomed long before they walked into that luxury real estate brokerage. They were hollow vessels, equipped with expensive tastes, but entirely lacking the emotional awareness necessary to navigate failure. When children are not taught how to process disappointment, they learn to medicate it with delusion. Raising the next generation demands a fierce commitment to fairness and emotional honesty. It requires sitting at the kitchen table and having uncomfortable conversations about debt responsibility and the sacred nature of boundaries. A healthy family does not demand blind loyalty at the expense of an individual's soul. When we teach our children that bloodlines act as a blanket justification for cruelty, we warp their understanding of love. Love is not a community chest to be plundered by whoever shouts the loudest. It is a shared garden that requires meticulous, honest tending. It demands that we hold our loved ones to the highest standards, not the lowest common denominator. Emotional awareness is the antidote to this transactional existence. It requires parents to acknowledge their own flaws and to dismantle the dangerous myth of parental infallibility. A child who watches their mother or father take responsibility for a failure learns a lesson far more valuable than a trust fund. They learn resilience. Beverly never offered her children resilience. She only offered them bailouts. When the offshore syndicate threatened Derek, he did not possess the emotional toolkit to confront his own ruin. He only knew how to locate a weaker target and shift the burden. This is the ultimate betrayal of parenthood, sending a child into the wilderness without a compass, armed only with a map of shortcuts that lead directly to a cliff. We watch stories like this because they resonate with the quiet, unacknowledged fractures in our own lives. We recognize the subtle manipulations at holiday dinners, the unspoken resentments brewing over inheritance, the forced smiles that do not reach the eyes. To navigate these treacherous waters, we must arm ourselves with knowledge and emotional fortitude. We must learn to draw lines in the sand, protecting our sanctuaries from those who would exploit our kindness under the guise of kinship. If this journey resonated with the unspoken truths of your own history, please subscribe to the channel Linda Vengeance. Join our growing community as we continue to explore the intricate, often hidden dynamics of human relationships, uncovering the raw realities of family betrayal and celebrating the quiet power of standing your ground. Your support allows us to keep bringing these crucial narratives into the light. The empty moving box sitting on Louise's pristine porch serves as a final, lingering monument to the consequences of deception. She filled it with the remnants of a hollow man, sealing away a chapter of her life defined by silent endurance. The biometric lock on her front door flashes green, granting access only to the truth. Yet, as the sun sets over the Annapolis skyline, casting long, fading shadows across the manicured lawns, one must pause and wonder about the houses next door. Behind the pristine white siding and the perfectly swept walkways, behind the closed curtains of our own neighborhoods, what quiet compromises are being made? How many families are currently sitting around polished dining tables, passing porcelain plates, while quietly forging the chains that will eventually bind their children? The silence inside a secured home is peaceful, but the silence between a parent and a child who have lost their moral compass is a ghost that haunts the hallways long after the lights go out. Are we building fortresses of truth for our families, or are we simply decorating the illusions we hope they never look behind?